scheme, and the deputy really should listen. So he might find it quite interesting. So the businesses in the productivity scheme, sir, that we're working on now, the pilot scheme, will be required to prove they've had productivity gains in their businesses. Now, if the deputy has or is looking for another meaning on productivity, then I'm happy for him to explain it to me, sir. But that's the current basis of the pilot productivity scheme, to improve productivity in business.
Deputy, no, you've had your questions, Deputy. Deputy Masson.
Thank you, sir. We'll try again. Licensing law. I wonder if the Minister can tell the Assembly how long we've been waiting for the new licensing law to come forward. Because as I understand it, at the end of the last Assembly, the Assistant Minister had a scheme and package ready to go. I wonder if the Minister could explain where we are with the licensing law.
Thank you, sir. And coincidentally, this was discussed at our ministerial meeting last Friday, and I understand the Assistant Minister, if he hasn't already, will be lodging a proposition which seeks to start the process of modernising, if you like, the licensing law. And I believe the first proposition, sir, which is partly to do with Deputy Ash's proposition of last year, will seek to introduce a statement of policy that the licensing assembly can refer to, so we're making decisions. But it is imminent, and perhaps the Assistant Minister would be kind enough to provide members with an update at some stage on timing.
Thank you. Conataba St Saviour.
Thank you, sir. Yes, it's regarding the Opera House. I want to know what the government wants to do about it. I don't want it to be the normal government buildings go into disrepair and then have to be knocked down and replaced. Something has to be done to preserve our Opera House. I have brought this up before. You promised me something would be done, and it wouldn't be thing, but nothing has been done. All through the pandemic, something could have been done. It looks absolutely disgusting. It needs this lovely wash down the front for a start. Would be very, very useful.
Minister.
Yes, and thank you, sir. The Opera House has been awarded funds from the fiscal stimulus programme for a refurbishment, sir. That work is due to be completed by June 2022. The process now, the procurement process is being followed in line with state's policy, and we, like other states members and members of the public, are keen to see the work completed as soon as we possibly can, sir. I share Constable St Saviour's views, I'm sure we all do, that the Opera House is a really important and key arts asset, and we need to make sure we restore it to its former glory as soon as we possibly can, sir. But the process is now fully in motion, sir. Thank you.
Sorry, could I just have think you said it's fully in motion and there's money from the stimulus fund. Have you provided the Opera House with enough money?
I believe so, sir. The answer to that is yes. Deputy's working closely with all of the, Deputy Morel is working closely with all of the stakeholders, sir, and there is ample funds to complete the work that's planned. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Senator Moore.
Thank you, sir. Could the Minister explain the rationale for offering a payout to the fishing industry in circumstances where local suppliers are currently sitting on stocks of shellfish? Our fishers say they can't go out to fish without a market, whilst the local hospitality industry cannot secure enough crab, and even local processors and wholesalers are unable to purchase sufficient amounts of live crab to satisfy demand, and therefore they're having to import it.
Minister.
I think so. The rationale behind providing financial support to our fishers during this period of crisis brought about by Brexit should actually speak for itself. Because if we don't provide financial support, we don't provide payroll support, we don't provide fixed cost support, and we don't provide freight assistance, then our fishing industry will be severely and significantly depleted. I do also understand the other part of the question, which is sort of ironic insofar as probably 70 or 80% of the seafood we consume on Ireland is actually imported. And that's a question we've been wrestling with for some time now. We've spoken about perhaps creating facilities on Ireland which will enable fishers and local producers to meet the high standards demanded now by the large retail multiples for selling the produce. It's not an easy solution, sir, but the Senator is right. It is a conundrum that we have to solve, and we'll continue to work to try and find a solution. Thank you.
Sir, supplementary.
Yes.
So I'm right in understanding that this is a timing issue. The Minister has failed to implement the fish processing plant that he has much talked about, not delivered, and therefore we're in a position where we're having to pay fishers compensation because they cannot go out to fish. Yet, meanwhile, our hospitality industry is importing fish stocks rather than actually having a sustainable local supply. So how and when will the Minister address this impasse and actually allow local people and visitors to enjoy local fish stocks?
Well, firstly, sir, just to correct the Senator, I've never promised to deliver a fish processing plant, although I have suggested it as a good idea. And that's something for the private sector to work with. In fact, we do have some really good facilities over here, but actually we're allowing a free market economy to prevail. For example, the hospitality and catering industry, in simple terms, sir, can import products perhaps more efficiently, more reliably, and at a lower price, sir, from large UK wholesalers and distributors, and local fishers can get a better price for their goods by exporting to France. That is at the crux of the matter, and there's no simple solution to that, although we will continue to work to find a solution. I cannot promise to deliver with taxpayer funds a fish processing plant, sir, but we work with the private sector to help facilitate any such endeavours into the future. Thank you.
We've come almost to the close of time, but we were delayed by one or two technical issues. So one final question from Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. Can I ask the Minister, does Jersey having a lower minimum wage and a higher cost of living than, for example, the UK, have a negative impact on business or industries in Jersey in retaining and attracting staff?
I'm not sure what the relevance of a comparison with Jersey and the UK. The attractiveness of staff coming to Jersey in certain sectors is due to a number of reasons. And actually, it's not so much minimum wage levels at the moment because, for example, certain sectors of the economy, including hospitality, have seen hyper wage inflation at the back end of the pandemic, and I would suggest there'd be very few, if any, workers in those industries still on the minimum wage because of the supply and demand issues in that sector. The bigger problem for attracting staff, not just in the lower paid areas, but in the higher skilled areas as well, is, of course, the availability of affordable accommodation. And we all know that's our key challenge at the moment.
Supplementary, sir?
Yes.
And so that was included in the cost of living part of the question that I asked. Is that not part of the need for a productivity plan to take account of the need for a high skill, high wage workforce rather than a low skill, low wage, low rights workforce? And would the Minister be an advocate for that? Or which of those would the Minister be an advocate for?
I thought I had, sir. We'll try harder to be an advocate for that. But of course, we all know this island doesn't just need lower skills or higher skills. It needs a complete mix. Every job in this island is valuable, and we need to make sure that we can provide the the support and the backup to ensure that all sectors, all businesses, all areas of commerce have availability to the right numbers of staff and the right skills. So the big challenge is, of course, to ensure that we can provide access to labour markets without having a long-term impact on our population challenges. But I shall certainly continue to promote where I can the fact that we want to become more productive. I think a good example of that, if I can say it, sir, is our rural economy strategy and the way we're looking at different and more valuable uses of our farming land, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move on to the final period of questions for the Chief Minister. And the first question is from Deputy Taddier.
Could I have a point of order, sir?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Sir, last week the Assistant Greffier circulated States members with an email about attendance in the Assembly, and part of the letter says, and I quote, PPST's view is that the link to the Teams should only be made available to those members unable to attend the Chamber for health reasons, rather than being made available to everyone as a matter of course. I was rather hoping the Chief Minister might have been here to answer questions in person, sir.
Well,
So I have a strong question, but as long as that's part of 15 minutes.
I'm sure that's been heard and noted. Thank you.
So if I can make the point, one of my family members...
Let's move on to the questions. Deputy Taddier.
Thank you, sir. Earlier we heard from the Minister for the Environment that Jersey can't control who fishes in its territorial waters. Is it a concern of the Minister that we don't have control over our territorial waters?
Chief Minister.
So I think the fundamental point is that there have been overlapping fishing rights in our waters for a very long time, and that the latest evolution of that of those shared rights is laid down in what we call the TCA, and therefore, sir, the fundamental issue, as I think the Minister referred to, the Minister alluded to earlier, is making sure that we get the right data to demonstrate that fishers or fishermen, women, can, if they are seeking a permit to fish in our waters, have the data that demonstrates that they have previously fished, sir, in accordance with the TCA.
So a supplementary, please.
Yes.
I think we're making this more complicated than my question is asking for. Can the Minister confirm whether we have the theoretical ability, if we wanted to say at a very near point in the future, the only people we wish to fish commercially in our waters are our fishermen? Do we have the ability to do that? And if we don't, is that a concern for the Chief Minister?
So under the international agreement, my understanding is that we cannot discriminate between different nationalities of fishing boats, effectively, and that is the agreement that was arrived at in negotiations, obviously between Jersey, also Guernsey and the Isle of Man have got similar provisions, and also because that's felt to be in the wider interests of in this instance Jersey, but also the Crown Dependencies. And so on that basis, on the basis it is to the wider benefit that we did participate in that international agreement, and then, sir, I do not have a concern. I do have a concern that if data is not forthcoming when we believe it's a perfectly reasonable request and was previously illegal, the data we are seeking, partially seeking, was a legal requirement previously under the Bay of Grenville.
Thank you. Deputy Ayer.
Thank you, sir. What action is the Chief Minister taking to ensure that our diesel fuel power plant can be maintained for an extended period if it becomes necessary? Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, sir, I got diesel fuel. I didn't hear the word after that, sir.
Do you repeat it? Can it be maintained?
Yes, our diesel fuel power plant can be maintained for an extended period if it becomes necessary. Thank you.
So I have actually addressed that publicly in the past, and in essence, under all normal circumstances, we have sufficient power in the power station to supply the island's ordinary needs. There are always caveats, sir, for exceptional circumstances. Equally, sir, on a slightly wider issue, certainly as of 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were fully stocked up on fuel, etc., on the island, sir.
Thank you, sir. And is the hospital generator still fit for purpose, and does it require any maintenance to ensure that it can run at full capacity? Thank you, sir.
So I'm not cited on that level of detail. I'll obviously go and ask the question. I would make very strongly the assumption, sir, because it's there not just for these circumstances, but obviously for any other emergency, and therefore, sir, it does need to be ready to kick in at relevant points in time, sir. So my assumption is yes. Obviously, if there's any change to that, I will inform members and also take the necessary action.
Senator Mezek?
Thank you, sir. Earlier this year, a review into Jersey's children's homes conducted by the Independent Children's Homes Association recommended the closure of Greenfields as a secure facility, or to put it another way, a child prison, stating that its use was neither efficient nor effective. Does the Chief Minister agree with that recommendation?
Chief Minister.
So the short answer is, if that's the, I have to say, sir, I need to go back and re-look at the report, but if that was the recommendation, sir, then my understanding is that certainly the fate of Greenfields, or the future of Greenfields, has been on discussion for some time, and there have been programs of work put in place to try and deal with that future, sir.
I mean, being specific, sir, it's arguing for the closure of the facility as essentially a child prison. Is that something that the Chief Minister would want to see happen in Jersey, given all the lessons that we're supposed to have learned from the care inquiry and moving towards other systems of justice that put the needs and interests of the child first?
Well, I think as I was saying, sir, I've got no reason not to agree with that, sir. I am saying I can't recall the details of the report, so with that caveat in mind, I can see no reason in principle for disagreeing with the minister, with the senator, sir.
Conrad Greville.
Thank you, sir. At the last sitting, the Treasury Minister said that the reward to those who found the Le Cartillon coin hoard would be paid by the end of the week. It's been 9 years and 4 months since it was uncovered. I've been asking questions for, I think, over a year. I keep getting told that it's sorted. When is the payment going to be made, and why has it not been paid by now?
I almost anticipated this question, sir, because I am probably as equally as frustrated. In fact, I think a number of ministers are as equally frustrated with the delay. The background to this, sir, and ironically it was probably about a year ago, is these issues around making sure that payments of a one-off or special nature need to be dealt with in a very, very careful way, as I think a number of us bear the scars on. And quite literally, it is, although there, from memory, I can't remember if it's a unanimous or by a significant majority of council ministers have made their position very, very clear in relation to resolving the issue of the coin hoard. I think we also need to be very, very clear as members that the Crown is not obliged to sell that coin hoard to us or to the public, sir. But it is obviously working very closely with us to resolve the issue. That, in essence, it is the governance side that is slowing down the actual implementation of the decision which the council ministers agreed to some months ago. And we have been very clear to officers that they need to expedite this as swiftly as they can. And I hope what I've said today will also incentivise the relevant officers to do exactly that. But I do share the Connotab's frustration. I would hope, to be honest, to have been in this position to say it is resolved before the summer, and we are not there yet. It is very much a matter of I's being dotted and T's crossed. And as I said, sir, I am as equally frustrated as the Connotab. I understood I was advised that I could use the word imminent. I made the point that it has been imminent for quite a number of weeks.
Supplementary, sir?
Yes.
I don't think he is as frustrated as I am. I've been asking questions for a year. Is he in charge? Shouldn't he be able to make this happen? And he didn't answer the question, when is it going to happen?
Well, sir, as I said, in terms of when, I go back to the point I've been told imminent. I've been told there is one final element to be done. I am, from past experience the last few weeks, I am told that that will be during the course of this week. I hope the relevant officers are listening to this. They will certainly be reminded of it very shortly. As to the level of frustration, sir, I take the point that the Connotab has been asking the question for quite a long time. Our levels of frustration are fairly high, sir. And finally, sir, yes, we are in charge, but there is a structure that the Public Finances Law puts in place around such payments, and with the experiences of what happened roughly a year ago, officers are being very, very cautious, and so therefore it is a matter, sir. We have given the decision. We are trying to make sure the processes make sure they do obviously fit within the law, and that's what the hold-up is, sir. We are working on it, sir, and I would like to see it done very, very soon.
Connotab of Trinity.
Thank you, sir. Next year will be the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. I believe, although I will stand corrected, that the UK, the May Bank Holiday weekend, will be removed to the Thursday, the 2nd of June, and there will be an additional bank holiday on Friday, the 3rd, to create a 4-day weekend. Are there any plans coming forward for a similar arrangements locally to mark this unique achievement? Thank you.
Chief Minister.
Sir, I think the Connotab is slightly ahead of us, but I believe that is a discussion that is coming to Council Ministers very shortly. And once the decision has been put there, sir, I will take great pleasure in updating the Assembly in due course. But it is a decision that will need to go to Council Ministers first before ultimately, sir, coming to this Assembly. Just to reiterate, sir, it is very much a unique and a unique situation, and I am entirely in agreement that it is a special one, sir.
Yes. Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. So I note in the government plan on page 194 of the main plan and on page 36 of the annex, there is allocated 1,390,000 and £3,226,000 for a chief of staff, and one being a restructuring in Justice and Home Affairs for a chief of staff. I wonder whether the Chief Minister can explain what the chief of staff does, and the role that's been created there. Thank you, sir.
Chief Minister.
Sorry, sir, I'm going to have to have just about got to the page, sir. I think I shall have to come back to the Deputy once I've actually read the detail on the page that he's alluding to and the annex, but I will do so in due course.
So can I just say, again...
You can ask a question, but you...
May I ask that the question is answered in terms of what the role of the Chief of Staff is? As Chief Minister, surely he should know the roles of the structure of the organisation of which he is a very key part.
I'm sorry, sir. The question was also very much around the budgets and the purposes of those budgets, sir, and I think that's the context.
Okay, I'll ask a similar level of question. Is Broad Street going to be renamed the West Wing? Is that why we're having a Chief of Staff?
Oh, wow.
That's as pointless a question as the answer, sir. I don't have a supplementary thing.
Senator Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to ask the Chief Minister if he agrees with the statement of his Social Security Minister recently that Jersey is, I forget the exact phrase, it was out in front, I think, was the phrase used by the Minister to describe Jersey's minimum wage, when as of next year, in fact, it will not be out in front, it will be lower than the UK's.
Chief Minister.
It would be very rare for me to disagree with the Social Security Minister, sir, and I believe she was specifically referring to our positioning vis-à-vis the Crown dependencies as opposed to the UK. But equally, sir, I do make the point that in terms of, certainly within the, I accept, is this about the minimum wage on the public sector, but certainly within the public sector, over the last few years, in a number of areas, pay has been more than inflation, sir.
Supplementary, sir, then just to confirm from the Chief Minister then that he does consider Jersey's minimum wage to not be out in front compared to the UK's, which of course has a lower cost of living.
Actually, so I didn't say that, sir. I said I would be very rare for me to disagree with the Social Security Minister, sir.
We have time for one more question. Deputy Gardner?
Thank you, sir. We all know that integrated technology solution will cost in excess of 63 million, at least. We've learned recently that the electronic patient records will cost 9.2 million. During the Public Accounts Committee hearing yesterday, we know there are 900 applications that should be connected to the IT system to make the IT works. For our question, how much the IT modernization will cost in total, approximate bill that we are facing, the answer was from the CEO, I don't know. Would Chief Minister know approximate number how much IT bill will be?
Chief Minister.
Sir, I think the point there is I can't give a total figure off the top of my head. The point that we've done around the IT investment into the system so far, because frankly there was way insufficient investment done in the past. And what we're trying to do is get those systems up to a point where they are in a far better place than they were when we came in. And hopefully, so in fact, I'm in the process of checking that, we will be giving quite a lot more detail on that on the briefing, which I think is coming this Friday, which is a mixture of the SEB side and also an update on briefings we gave to members in, I think, the end of 2019 in advance of the then government plan. But I think the reason I suspect it was said we don't know is because it's kind of how long is a piece of string and over what time period. IT is going to be, there's going to be required in this world a continuous and greater investment in IT if we want to bring an organisation up to fit for purpose, to deliver services more efficiently and to deliver services in the way that islanders over time will expect. And I can certainly say that anecdotally, a conversation with one officer who was saying it's slightly distressing that actually some smaller businesses can actually receive information on their mobile phone about their business far more than officers in the States can around their departments. And that is the magnitude of the problem ahead of us. And I thought it was 700, if it's gone up to 900 applications that the deputy refers to, is an illustration of the problems we face, because I suspect that not all of those 900 applications are compatible with each other, easily talk to each other and transfer information across, or all operate on new systems rather than archaic systems. So it is, apologies, sir, for not being able to answer directly the question, although I suppose I have said I don't have the answer to hand, but it does give the context as to why we don't yet have that answer to hand. We're focused on, if you like, phases 1, 2, 3 and 4 of the IT programme and getting those in play. And they are really, really critical and have been very, very critical, for example, in dealing with the COVID crisis and working from home remotely, as well as the securities of the system, sir.
That concludes...
Supplementary, do I have time? Or?
Well, I'm afraid to say that time has now run out. There's nothing under J or K, so that brings us on to public business. And the first item of public business is the Social Security Amendment of Law Minimum Earnings Threshold Jersey Regulations, lodged by the Minister for Social Security. For the purpose of this debate, the main respondent is the Chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel. The debate resumes following the adoption of the principles on the 15th of September and the referral to the Scrutiny Panel. Minister.
Yes, thank you, sir. And firstly, let me apologise. I asked my secretary to send round to all states members on Friday. I got the comments from scrutiny. They were on time, but they brought up some really different points that we were going to cover on the states members briefing on Monday. And also, in the meantime, I've been contacted by Revenue Jersey, who have some really issues with this. They thought it was going to be a small piece of legislation, and there's lots going on behind the scenes with massive businesses out there. So I'd said on Friday I was going to defer, sir, without understanding. I should have understood. The Gref contacted me straight away that I have to ask permission because it was today's November that was set the date. I don't think states members have got all the information that they need, and I put a briefing in for Friday the 19th of November, so Revenue Jersey can come as well. We will then have the debate, and obviously if people are still not convinced, they can vote against it, but I would rather states members vote with all the facts, and I've been told it is very important that they put their point across, because I've been speaking to industry for 2 years who think this is going to be done. So, sir, I'm in the hands of the Assembly. I ask for this to be deferred to the next sitting, and so I can bring states members up to full speed. Thank you.
So your proposition, Minister, is to defer the continuation of the debate until the 23rd of November, is it?
Yes, sir.
Is that proposition seconded?
Seconded, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir, and I thank the Minister for her introductory comments. The question that I'd like the Minister to respond to is, when this was initially lodged, we actually had a proposition during the debate to refer it back for more information, because we could see, and I personally raised in the Assembly that day that there was information missing from this proposition, information about its consequences on the poorest and in the island particularly. And so I'd really appreciate the Minister explaining to me why she couldn't back then just concede the reference back request, because it was clear as day that there was information missing, and the Minister refused that, and by one vote, I believe, won that particular proposition. But here we are now with the Minister asking us to defer it because, by her own admission, there isn't enough information, exactly as she was told 4 weeks ago, sir. So if she could respond to that in her summing up, I would be grateful. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. 4 weeks ago, it was me who brought the reference back and said that there is no information in this of the consequences of this change. And in fact, the consequences will have negative impacts that haven't been thought through for the lowest earners and the most vulnerable in our society. But for some reason, which seems to be a habit now, as a sort of reflex, it was opposed. And those reflexive oppositions to good ideas are what are showing this government up to be both inadequate in the way it's dealing with policy and legislation, and also really frustrating for increasing numbers of members of this Assembly. The reference back should have been agreed. There should have been a more thoughtful piece of legislation brought to this Assembly, but indeed it wasn't. Now what we have are principles that are fundamentally, and I voted against those, fundamentally flawed, with detail and regulation that is even more flawed and full of holes. And we're asking this Assembly to make a decision. So I think the only decision to make is to say, reject this proposal entirely and come back afresh in a few months' time with something that's actually meaningful, because we've got ourselves in a very bad position. So I'd ask the Minister to withdraw this entirely. I wouldn't vote for the deferring of this now. I would just vote against it, full stop, because we need to remove this from our legislation. It will not work. It's badly thought through. It's badly presented, and it will have consequences that will be bad for Jersey. Sir, as a States member, I can't vote for that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Pamplin.
Thank you, sir. I rise in respect to the work done following the promise we made as the scrutiny panel. To remind members, I'm the Vice Chair, and this has been in consultation with my two fellow panel members. As the Minister, which we thank her for, made reference to, we did return this piece of work as agreed with the Assembly at the last sitting. That was following the debate of the principles of this proposition. That also followed our previous work that led to the previous comments paper we produced for members pre that debate. During the debate, members started to share concerns which drew reference to ours in that comments paper. Then, as others have just stated, a reference back debate was narrowly defeated by one vote. So based on that and other decisions, we decided to call it in to do a timely, targeted piece of work and return it back in time for today, as we have done, to assist members. This was achieved by a panel of 3 members, supported by their smaller team of 2 officers. Unlike others, and like many others, under a great pressured workload that we all have at this stage of the year, but I say nevertheless, following constructive engagement, present our work with thanks to the Minister and her team. I want to make my next point very clear, sir, speaking as myself. As picking up from feedback from members, it is a pleasure to do so now, returning to the Assembly, seeing everybody in person. But from hearing from all sides of the Assembly in the last day and a half, the motivations of some of our scrutiny work. So speaking as an independent member and a committed member to provide impartial, constructive scrutiny work, in the vein as a critical friend, the ministers we hold to account on the public's behalf, our work has always been based on well-researched questions and information based on what we presented or discover. If you are not prepared for one of my scrutiny hearings, good luck to you. Also, some have also said today that scrutiny deliberately delays pieces of work, Deputy, end quote, which I hope is not being suggested for this particular piece of work that we have concluded. Our comments, as the Minister said, was lodged and emailed to members last Friday around midday, and we haven't brought an amendment, for example. This panel hasn't deliberately or otherwise blocked or called in other pieces of work without dutiful consideration. I believe this is the first time we've done so in 3.5 years. And we have a very good constructive relationship with both the ministers and their departments. But as I outlined at the beginning of this short speech, the Assembly during that in-principle debate supported our decision to do so, and I stress we kept our commitment to meeting that Assembly decision to return it to assist members with their voting in second reading that we all presumed would be today. I also wish to draw members' minds to the very light order paper concerning public business that could see us possibly finish today, or at very least tomorrow morning. However, the next sitting in 3 weeks' time, sir, has 11 items, including the debate on assisted dying. If shorting of lodging of 1 day is agreed on that proposition, Senator Mesick's affordable housing proposition, and after question time earlier, that could be a heated debate, a debate on the minimum wage brought by Deputy Southern, and a deferred draft COVID-19 enabling provisions debate that was very heated as well, which caused the Minister to defer to this sitting. Those were predicted, as I highlighted, to be very lengthy, technical and possibly emotional debates, not including some potential amendments, not least to the assisted dying debate. That is in 3 weeks' time. We have provided our scrutiny work with our position, and it is for members if they agree with our work and our conclusions on their own independent voting decisions, and of course based on what the Minister will put forward in her summing up and presentation of it. I believe we could have that debate today in summary based on our scrutiny work to assist members, and as I have also outlined the pressures of the next sitting, which I remind members is the last sitting before our final sitting of 2021, the government plan in December. We have 2 sittings scheduled for the end of this year. I'm also grateful we just heard from the Minister for the first time of the intention that Revenue Jersey have provided information. Of course, we did have a meeting with the Minister and the team at the very beginning when we started our work on this, that where this was coming, which was Revenue Jersey. So I do find it surprising that right at the last minute following our work, they now want to provide further information. We did request that. So I only do that to be a helpful member to fellow states members. I have also, just literally minutes before we started, received a message from our scrutiny officer with the Minister saying they would like to meet us to update us, which we gratefully receive. This is all very last minute. So I present all I've just said to assist members if it remains in their hands if they wish to have this debate today or not. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Lehegaran.
Thank you, sir. I will just reiterate what Deputy Pamplin has said in relation to this particular matter. This was lodged in August and brought to us in September. And at that time, it was considered to be a piece of work that was ready to go. And now we find ourselves here at the beginning of November being told that actually we now wish to defer. We've done a comments paper, we've done the work on it, and as far as I'm concerned, sir, the matter needs to be run today. However, what I would like to highlight, sir, which I was trying to do very quickly, but I will not be able to potentially be the primary responder because in approximately half an hour or so I will have to leave because I have a hospital appointment. So if that matter does fall back to my panel, I would ask that the Vice Chair can take that role. Thank you, sir.
If no other member wishes to speak, oh yes, Conatable someone.
Thank you, sir. I've listened very carefully to the arguments put forward by the scrutiny panel, and I have a great deal of sympathy with the fact that they've done a lot of work which has gone into the proposition. But nevertheless, the Minister's made it extremely plain that she is not happy to debate this today because there's further information to come from Revenue Jersey. And I, for one, would not be comfortable to vote for this proposition, or indeed vote for it without that information. In effect, we're being presented with an incomplete picture, and I think we should follow the Minister's recommendation and defer this proposition to the next sitting. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. No other member wishes to speak? Oh yes, Deputy Young.
Yes, so if I can ask the Minister a question, obviously coming to this fresh, I was one who shared the reservations about this in detail. But obviously, the points that Deputy Pamplin are making are absolutely right. It's the agenda for the next sitting is really scary in terms of its scope and the issues we have to deal with. And so I'm very, very worried about just putting another item on. And of course, we've got the government plan. And I do wonder if the Minister could tell us what would be the consequences if this matter goes over into the new year. Because to me, I mean, this is a change, but is it time critical? Could the Minister tell us that so it would at least help me know which way to support? Because I don't feel comfortable about adding something to an already very, very crowded and difficult agenda. And we do seem to have comments. So I'd invite the Minister to respond to that, please.
Thank you. Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. And this is a right shambles. What's the solution? Is it possible that this should be deferred properly until first quarter next year? Will that do any harm? I don't know. But it's for the Minister to say. As far as I'm concerned, when people come to this Assembly this badly prepared, I don't feel able to vote on anything. I'd rather kick it into the long grass until we're properly ready.
Senator Mezek?
Thank you, sir. It's just to add that there is absolutely nothing stopping the Minister from relodging some sort of equivalent proposal after this. So if we vote to not allow a deferment now and to ask the Minister then to either withdraw it or for the Assembly to throw it out, once there's been a real good think over it, that further information found and presented to members, this can, if necessary, be brought back at a much more manageable time, and the Assembly can deal with it probably in a much more effective way at that point. But it's very clear that what's on the table right now is not satisfactory, so let's get it off the table now and put it back on the table at a later time. But the next sitting is clearly inappropriate for it to be then.
If no other member wishes to speak, I call upon the Minister to reply.
Yes, sir, and actually no one's more annoyed than me that I've been put in this position because this was supposed to be a small piece of legislation to change hours to money, and it was okay if it went through and it was okay if it didn't go through. That's sort of what I was told, and actually over the last few days when it got called in and when the paper came in from scrutiny, as I say, there's been over a 2-year piece of work we've done every company out there who do a payroll to do the payroll different. They've invested in kit. They are geared up to do this. It's been a 2-year leading time, and I'm getting emails left, right and centre from Revenue Jersey saying this is imperative. We don't know what will happen, basically, but let us try and explain to states members why it's imperative. It's not me. I've had to change this little bit of legislation that's not happening at the moment, but there's a bigger story. So they've asked me if I can defer it for 1 week. I've got the states members briefing in. They'll tell you. What happens, it's the 1st of January, by the way, Deputy Young, the 1st of January, 2 years, all the employers out there, and they have been consulting with their employees. It's evidenced by scrutiny. But if you still don't want the change, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how they will do it. They admit, I apologise, I will admit for them. We should have made sure the legislation was changed 2 years ago before we told everyone to go out and buy these new bits of kit, and this is how you're going to collect tax and social security. And we haven't done it. So I'm in the hands of the Assembly, sir. You either want to know the extra information, how bad this could be for Jersey, or you push me to go ahead with the debate today, kick it out. We won't be able to have the debate, like Senator Mesic says, again in this quarter. So it will go over to the start date in January that everyone's keyed up for. I really ask members, the sit-in next time is going to be a long sit-in. Do you want to make the right choice for the workers? It's not just about low-paid workers. It's about people who will be collecting money differently. And, you know, how will they be paid? I'm not even sure. I don't know those answers, but Revenue Jersey need to put that to you. So I really ask you to support a 2-week delay. We'll have the states members briefing. We will also talk to two scrutiny panels now, apparently, the one that scrutinised Treasury and my panel, to just give these extra things which I didn't know about. I knew why I was doing it, but I didn't know how imperative it was. I make the amendment, I make the proposition, sir. I really hope that you can move this 2 weeks and get the right information for people who want to get paid. Thank you.
Is the appel called for? Thank you. The appel has been called for. So to remind members, the proposition is to defer the continuance of this debate until the 23rd of November, the session beginning the 23rd of November. And I've asked members to cast their votes. Sorry? You ready? The voted, are they? But what about the ones on the link? Have they all voted as well?
Yeah.
So I wonder if people need a reminder on how to vote with the buttons now.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. They've all voted, haven't they? That's just the chamber vote there, is it? Sorry? Right. If all members, either in the Assembly or remotely, have had the opportunity...
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just check? We are just meant to vote in the chat. Is that correct?
Yes, there is no vote on this occasion.
Yes, you can only vote in the chat.
Thank you, sir.
If you're remote. There's quite a lot of voting in the chat.
Some people are voting multiple times in the chat.
Some people have voted more than once in the chat, and some people in the chamber have voted in the chat. I think that was just you, perhaps, Deputy Young.
Sorry, sir, I've got no choice because I'm told I need to do that. I've had my instruction.
I understand. So if all members of the audience are casting the votes, I close the voting. And I can announce that the proposition has been adopted, but I'm unable to be precise as to the numbers. Normally, I take care about being precise about the numbers.
Just Social Security, Minister.
In the Assembly, there are 16 votes pour and 14 votes contre. but in the link there were significantly more votes pour than contra. But the Greffier and I will now work together to give you the precise figure.
May we have the pause, please, sir?
Yes, you can in a moment when the Greffier's content. I could try and work it out myself.
So the grand totals.
Yes, we believe the final tally to be 27 votes pour and 16 contra. And in a moment, the Greffier will read out those who voted pour and those who voted contra.
Those voting pour: Senator Farnham, the Conotab of St Helier, Conotab of Trinity, St Mary, St Juan, Deputy Martin, Deputy of Grouville, Deputy Lewis, Pinnell, Labby, Wickenden, Deputy of St Mary, Deputy Ash, Gida, Deputy of St Peter and of Trinity. And then voting in the chat, those voting for Senator Ferguson and Lafondre, the Conotabs of St Saviour and St Peter, and Deputies Masson, Deputy of St Juan, Deputy Truscott, Young, Deputy of St John and Deputy Alves. We hope.
Thank you. The next item is the Competent Authorities Minister's release of minutes of meetings to scrutiny lodged by the Corporate Services Panel. There is an amendment by the Council of Ministers, which needs to be the subject of a proposal to reduce the minimum lodging period before it can be debated. Chief Minister, do you wish to make the proposition under Standing Order 26.7 that the lodging period be reduced to allow the amendment to be debated at this sitting?
Yes, please, sir. I did email everybody late yesterday afternoon, and once again, so I apologise for the oversight that caused me to be in the position of having to ask the permission of the Assembly, sir.
Is the proposition to reduce the lodging period seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the proposition to reduce the lodging period? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. I think I may have just jumped the queue, but that won't be such a bad thing. I'll give it a go. So I'm afraid so often we've been here and we've reduced lodging periods, and all of us have had to consider whether to do that. And sometimes there have been late amendments because things have changed or things have been lodged at the last moment, or a scrutiny panel has done some work, and that's all the choice we've had. But the reason for this that we were sent the other day, last night, whenever it was that the amendment was presented to the Council of Ministers lodged a week before the sitting. But of course, and so what it appears to have happened is that Council of Ministers couldn't get their act together to talk about the amendment before the lodging period was ended. And so therefore, we'll come to the Assembly and we'll say, well, we couldn't meet as Council of Ministers, we couldn't get it together, we couldn't email round, we couldn't talk to each other in time, so we'll just disregard the standing orders of this Assembly. Now, so the context of today is quite astounding, given so many questions over whether questions have been answered, questions over the quality of answer of questions in this Assembly. And now we're getting to a point where what we're going to do, and let's think very carefully about this, regardless of what place on the political spectrum you come from, about the standing orders and the processes in this Assembly that we are standing in. Are we going to say, when the Council of Ministers cannot get itself sorted to discuss an amendment, we'll just disregard the standing orders, that's okay, we'll just let them do that? Sir, this is not a good idea. I cannot accept the reduction of this lodging period on this occasion, because it is simply the wrong way to do it and sets a precedent for the future, which is, at any time, our standing orders now become completely correlated with the meetings of the Council of Ministers. That is what we are accepting if we accept this reduction in lodging period. And that, sir, is not the way this assembly should work. Otherwise, sir, let's get the standing orders and let's just bin them, because they serve no purpose for us whatsoever. We have no processes, and all we're waiting to do is the gift of the Council of Ministers according to their timetable. Sir, I urge members in this assembly to not reduce this lodging period, because this is not a suitable way for this assembly to act or proceed if we're going to genuinely say that we have any rules and standing orders for this assembly. So I urge members to not accept this reduction in lodging period. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Senator Moore.
Thank you, sir. And I won't rehearse the points made by the previous speaker, but I will simply reiterate to the Assembly that this proposition lodged by the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel was lodged on the 6th of September. The Council of Ministers managed to cobble together a fudge and bring it to the Assembly a week ago, their amendment. It's simply unacceptable, so it shows that they are totally ill-prepared, their eye is not on the ball, and they simply have not even brought a credible amendment that deserves any thought or consideration. And so I would beg the Assembly to just move on and not accept this reduced lodging period, because we have before us a sensible proposition that will assist scrutiny and in turn the public to understand the workings and the decision-making process of the competent authorities, ministers, and the amendment is an irrelevance, and therefore let's stick to standing orders, let's stick to the proper process, and those people who can bring reasonable arguments to the Assembly in good time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Mezek.
Sir, no, no, no. There must surely come a point where enough is enough. The government is really taking the mickey with this one, sir. They have not made any case whatsoever as to why reducing a lodging period would be in the public interest. We're in this situation because they didn't get their act together in time, and it is as simple as that. The proposition has been lodged for long enough for them to have discussed it early and to put together an amendment. And in the email explanation we have not been given a reason for why this has been lodged late. And as Deputy Ward said, what precedent does it set where the government can make no effort whatsoever and the Assembly just rolls over and lets them have a reduced lodging period because they fancy it, because it's extra convenient for them? It strikes me as being an abuse of the procedures we have in this Assembly to allow for reduced lodging periods. And just to make this final point, sir, that I don't think has been made by previous speakers, that the Chief Minister says in his email that there is value in debating the full points. Well, actually, sir, there is no value in doing so, because we can have a debate on the standalone proposition about the scrutiny panels receiving the minutes, and we can decide either for or against that. Their amendment is to remove minutes from the proposition and replace it with papers and a summary of decisions made. Well, sir, if the Assembly votes against the scrutiny proposition to have minutes handed over, there is nothing whatsoever stopping the government from voluntarily doing that work and handing over those papers. So they are not prohibited from doing what they're now proposing they do. They don't need the Assembly's permission to do that. They can go ahead and do it. So there is no public interest in debating this, because they can do it without the Assembly's consent anyway, and nobody would have a problem with that. But they're asking us to set aside the long-established rules of this Assembly because they didn't get their act together in time, and that's not good enough. And so in a week where they failed to abide by the rules of producing answers to written questions on time, 4 questions they failed to do that with, and a week after they failed to do that to 2 questions, I really do urge the Assembly to assert itself as the sovereign decision-making body of the island and remind the Council of Ministers who is boss. We've set these rules, and the government is not above those rules. I urge members not to support reducing the lodging period for this.
Thank you. Deputy Southern?
Yes, sir. And the actions of this Assembly and this government and these ministers have gone from shambolic to worse. It's one, and in a sense, we've almost brought it on ourselves because we accepted in the time of COVID, the time of a real emergency, that there were urgent decisions to be made, and we had extra meetings, indeed, to have those meetings and have fully discuss what was happening. And we've been slack. But at some stage, we have to get back to where we should be, behaving according to standing orders, with some sort of rationale dominance instead of just, oh, we didn't do this and we've, well, terribly sorry, but please accept it. No. Time has come to say no. Enough. This is not a vital issue, and for once we should stand here and say enough. Don't accept that it's okay to have reduced notice. Let's oppose that. Let's stop that. Let's stop it now, and perhaps these ministers will get their act together and start behaving efficiently and getting stuff within the time frame to us in order to decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Martin.
Yes, thank you, sir. I think the email that was sent round is quite clear. There was a misunderstanding. The comments were presented to us in time, and the amendment, and we had a good discussion. But the person who lodged them, it quite clearly says, thought they had lodged a week before, but was told because it was a panel, it should have been 2 weeks. It was a genuine mistake, sir. Absolutely genuine mistake. I'm fed up with this shambolic government from people who sit behind me on not doing too much, sir. And we've got very busy agendas, yes. I can dare what I like, sir. Anyway, you know, sometimes you just have to speak out how you feel, sir. This literally is a good amendment. We could clear it. It does what the corporate services want us to do, to release the papers from CAMS, and then we can have a 5-minute debate and it will all go through. But no, let's stick on protocol. Let's not do this. Oh, let's come back with something else. And, you know, because we're all such a shambles because we're not doing it on time. I absolutely refute that, sir. Please accept the slightly, yes, it is a week late. It was a week late, basically on purpose, because we thought we only had a week. We only had to lodge it a week before. Sorry, mistake made. If you never made a mistake, hold your hand up. Sir, please, I say to the Assembly again, I don't know, it is how many months away from the elections? We're already playing these stupid games. Just get on, do the work. Allow this amendment today. Have a good debate on what we've put together. Thank you.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. I understand mistakes can be made, but we are all very clear usually on standing orders. We are not, I mean, I'm the youngest, not already not the youngest, but I'm the, what I say, I think that since I've been elected 2.5 years ago, I made very clear checking with the graphic when I need to lodge my amendments. And the only reason that my amendments were lodged late when I needed to react to the amendment of the amendment to make sure that it's coming. But I accept now, I understand that it was some sort of mistake. I have a question to Chief Minister. As a usual practice, we don't have to do that, but it is in a practice, when you bring the amendment forward, you engage with the proposer and to have some sort of discussion about possible amendment. Again, if it's any of the members of the corporate services didn't speak or can speak, my question was it any engagement, and if yes, what engagement, and if not, it's not, between the Chief Minister or representative from the Council of Ministers with the corporate service to discuss possible amendment?
Thank you. Conataba St Helier.
Thank you, sir. From the newest member to the oldest member in the chamber, I don't know how many times I've benefited from the Assembly's willingness to accept a late amendment from me, and it would therefore seem childish to me not to allow the Council of Ministers to do it on this occasion. It would also seem to me rather illogical. Surely members want to have a debate on the amendment, and if we don't have that chance, some members will vote against the proposition who might otherwise have supported it. So it doesn't make any logical sense not to have the debate on the amendment. I think the final point I'd make, sir, is that the public must get really fed up of hearing the states having long debates about what to do next. And that's what we're doing now, and I suggest that we get on and have the debate. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you. Of course, for those who are foot stamping, what the corollary of what the senior member of St Helier, who I think was perhaps having a senior moment in his terms of his logic, was saying, is that we don't need the standing order anymore, because if we follow his logic and we say that because because members have allowed me to reduce the lodging period for mine, I must therefore reduce it for all, means that we simply shouldn't have lodging periods for amendments. But that's not where we are. And I take it back to what the standing order says. In the past, it used to be that a matter had to be of such urgency to Jersey that, and it would be prejudicial not to debate it. That was changed to whether it's in public interest, sir. But that case has not been made by the mover of this proposition, and that's what we're seeing time and time again. And whilst it was commonplace during the pandemic to reduce lodging periods, it was done because it was deemed to be, I think in some cases, urgent, and there was definitely a public interest test there that was met. But what we've seen here is that we don't need this, as Senator Mezek has said, because we will have a debate on the pros and cons of releasing the documents, and that the Council of Ministers are at liberty to release what they want. And I think in the context of a week where we've seen, I would call it a contempt shown by the Council of Ministers for not just standing orders, but for the Assembly and by extension, therefore, for the public, by not even attempting to answer questions in some cases, and not even submitting answers, that simply can't go on. And that's irrespective of who the government is, sir. The processes do matter, and whilst it is, of course, right that we allow latitude on certain occasions, I don't think this is one. I don't see how we can tell people out there to abide by rules in life if we don't apply them to ourselves, sir. So thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on this proposition to reduce the lodging period? Not, I call upon the Chief Minister to reply.
Yes, thank you, sir. I think I'll try and keep it as short as possible. It is I would hope, a relatively simple and straightforward amendment, but I won't get into the merits or otherwise of it, which obviously some members started to do. But I thank the warm words of the Constable of St Helier, so I think he encapsulated quite a lot of what I wanted to say, i.e. there have been various times in my political life when this Assembly and the Assembly and indeed the Council of Ministers have worked to shorten lodging periods for whatever the reasons are. It has been very clear, sir, a mistake was made. Of my unqualified apology, sir, on that basis, and I'm still unclear exactly why that mistake was made. But for whatever reason, an assumption was made somewhere that it was a week-long period. That assumption was wrong, and so whilst the person doing the lodging and producing the reports, etc., once the Council Ministers had established a position, which was a while ago, they were working to a week lodging period, and I was only informed of that late yesterday afternoon as being an issue, and fairly obviously, sir, I did not find it satisfactory, and that's the position that I'm in today in front of the Assembly. So I absolutely offer my complete apologies on that subject, sir. It is very much a matter of the Assembly. I would hope it would allow us to have a sensible debate, and the amendment is adopted. Obviously, it would get the full backing of the council. The amended proposition would get the full backing of the council ministers. The unamended proposition will leave for some issues which we will elaborate on during the debate. In relation to Deputy Gardner's question, sir, unfortunately, we did not have an engagement in corporate services. Equally, we did not receive an engagement, as far as I'm aware, when the proposition was originally lodged, because we could have had a discussion around the issues of requesting just the minutes, but some of it had been rehearsed in the past. I think that's more a matter for the debate as well. I can't really add anything else, sir. I think those members, all members, will probably have made their position fairly clear. I would ask the Assembly, again, I apologise unreservedly for the oversight. I do not think it is acceptable, but that, as they say, is where we are. It was not done with respect to the Assembly. It was a mistake that was made, and I think we all just have to make sure that what I thought were good processes were in place to avoid this happening are reviewed to ensure this does not happen again. I don't think I can add anything else other than to seek the view of the Assembly by way of a vote, and I guess I call for the appel, sir.
The appel has been called for. I ask members to return to their seats. The greffier will now open the voting, and will place a link in the chat for those not in the Assembly to make things easier in terms of calculating the outcome of votes. If you agree that the lodging period should be reduced, you vote pour. If you do not, then you vote contra. All members have had the opportunity to cast their votes either in the Assembly or in the chat or the link. Then ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the proposition to reduce the lodging period has been adopted. In the Chamber, 20 votes pour and 9 votes contra. And on the link, additional votes, making a total, we believe, of 25 votes pour and 14 votes contra. Can you confirm those numbers, greffier? Yes, 25 votes pour and 14 votes contra.
Can we have the pour and contra? Can we have them all, please? Sir?
Yes.
So those voting pour in the Chamber, Senator Farnham, the Connétables of St Helier, St Brelard, Grouville, Trinity, St Mary and St One, Deputies Martin, Deputy of Grouville, Deputy Lewis, Higgins, Pinnell, Labby, Wickenden, Deputy of St Mary, Deputies Ash, Morell, Guida, Deputy of St Peter and the Deputy of Trinity. And those voting for in the chat, Senator Lafondre, Connétable of St Peter, Deputy Young, Deputy Truscott, the Deputy of St One. And those voting contra in the chat, Senator Valois, Deputy Tadier, the Deputy of St John, Deputy Alves and Deputy Doublé, and those voting contra in the Chamber, Senators Moore and Mesick, the Connétable of St Martin, Deputy Southern, the Deputy of St Martin, Deputies Ayer, Ward, Pamplin and Gardner.
We now move to the debate. Competent authorities ministers, release of minutes to scrutiny lodged by the Corporate Services panel. The main responder is the Chief Minister, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion that, on request by the Scrutiny Liaison Committee, any approved minutes of meetings of the competent authorities ministers should be shared in confidence and without redactions by the Chief Minister with that committee for distribution to the relevant scrutiny panels.
Senator Moore.
Thank you, sir. Well, the Corporate Services panel lodged this proposition to enable oversight and understanding of decision-making in response to the COVID pandemic by the competent authorities ministers. Contrary to the suggestion of the Chief Minister in the previous debate, we have raised the issue of sharing of minutes on a number of occasions with him, mostly in informal sessions that the Scrutiny Liaison Committee have held with the Chief Minister periodically when he finds time to meet with us, but also in open public hearing sessions. Because, sir, one of the main purposes of scrutiny is, as members are aware, to hold the government to account. And in order to do that, it is of assistance if we can understand the decision-making process that has led to the decisions that are made. And often, sir, as we've raised with the Chief Minister on several occasions, it is very difficult for members to understand how decisions suddenly appear when we're not party to the process that has gone on behind closed doors. So the corporate competent authorities ministers hold the core powers, whether as ministers, there are some chuckles. I'm actually surprised to see that it's the Minister for Home Affairs chuckling, because usually it's other members that have a different name for the competent authorities ministers. But I will not go into that at this point because I wouldn't consider it to be parliamentary, sir. So the competent authorities ministers hold the core powers, whether as ministers or as competent authorities, in response to emergencies and threats to our community. Those ministers have met formally at least 41 times in the past year, and there's been no suggestion as to when those ministers or that grouping will be disbanded, other than when the global pandemic is over. The competent authorities ministers is a small group by nature, and its decisions impact the island greatly. It is critical then that this decision-making body receive the due oversight, particularly in this time when ministers have held heightened powers and abilities to bring forward emergency legislation. There is a clear need and will for transparency in decision-making by the general public within the island and by members of scrutiny. As seen in the minutes of STAC, a specialist secretarial staff within the GREF produces detailed and impartial records of meetings, and the panel finds it concerning that the Chief Minister insinuates that competent authorities ministers would specifically avoid deliberations in a formal setting. Following the adoption of a proposition from Deputy Pamplin, those minutes are now published, and the members of STAC have, it appears, been comfortable with their safe space being shared with members of the public. And it has been most useful to have access to those minutes to understand and look back at the deliberations of the STAC at those key points in decision-making over the past 18 months of pandemic. The proposition, however, did not go as far as to request publication of the exempt minutes. I'm back now on the corporate services particular proposition. We do acknowledge these may contain confidential information. However, sharing them with scrutiny would enable due oversight to help understanding outside of the corporate competent authorities ministers. The primary purpose of scrutiny, of course, being to hold the government to account. This is made difficult, sir, without the relevant information to hand, and the relatively new creation of the competent authorities ministers' meetings as a regular decision-making fixture has posed an additional difficulty for us. The proposition is simple, to assist scrutiny in carrying out its functions, to be the critical friend when required, to provide confidence to this Assembly and to the general public of the decision-making during the pandemic. Thank you, sir.
Is the proposition seconded?
Seconded, sir.
Thank you. There is an amendment lodged by the Chief Minister, and as I understand it, that amendment is not accepted, is it, Senator Moore? No. Chief Minister.
Thank you,
The greffier will now read the amendment.
Page 2. After the words "the Scrutiny Liaison Committee," for the words "any approved minutes," substitute "agendas, papers and actions agreed." After the words "without redactions by the," for the words "Chief Minister," substitute "competent authorities ministers." After the words "that committee for distribution," insert the words "in confidence."
Chief Minister.
Yes, sir, thank you. And firstly, can I thank the Assembly for at least agreeing to have this debate, to obviously see what the outcome is. And I absolutely agree, sir, with the principles that scrutiny is there to act as a critical friend and to hold the government to account. And obviously, all ministers appear in front of scrutiny at various times. And indeed, sir, we answer, I would hope, any and every question that's put to us by the relevant panels, and we do actually do our best, sir, to answer questions in the Assembly as well. And the difficulty with this, sir, which I'm going to go over in a little bit more detail, is the actual consequences or potential consequences of the actual unamended proposition, and particularly if it also gets applied to other bodies eventually, such as not part of the proposition. But if it was then start applying to minutes of other bodies, for example, such as the States Employment Board or the Council of Ministers, i.e. as a precedent. And I'm sure any politician worth their salt will recognise the terminology used at times about when they receive advice about whether something does establish a precedent which might cause concern in the future. So, and the other issue which I will need to refer to, sir, which is covered under the, for example, in the various protocols in the government scrutiny, is, for example, the provision of legal advice, which the original proposition did not address because it sought unredacted minutes, which obviously do contain legal advice specific to ministers, and which, in the same way that legal advice provided to scrutiny panels is kept confidential to that panel. Obviously, the usual precedent says that advice provided to ministers or to bodies such as competent authorities or council ministers or whoever, that legal advice is specific to that particular body. So what the purpose of this amendment, sir, is to reconcile the 86th proposition with the Code of Engagement between Scrutiny and Executive, and really crucially, it's to preserve what we call the very frank and candid discussions which are essential to the decision-making process of CAM. And yeah, I think we all accept, sir, that none of us, when we started our role as state members in 2018, were anticipating a pandemic. And obviously, sir, we are now in 2021, towards the end of it, and we are not yet out of the pandemic, although obviously to date, Jersey has come through it very, very well. But the decision-making process at times had to be swift, and obviously at times had to consider very difficult issues. And the long-standing principle for the full content of both ministerial and scrutiny meetings is that they are confidential, and that's in line with best practice in the UK and elsewhere. We don't see the minutes for Cobra or the Cabinet being published, so that helps ensure that decisions can be made following full and frank discussion between ministers and officers without reservation or hesitation. Now, obviously, I was in previously the role as, I think it was then the president of what was then called the Chairman's Committee, so I can fully understand the rationale behind the proposition that has been brought, sir. But, and I do fully respect and recognise the desire for that transparency in the decision-making. And I can definitely recall a number of conversations with myself, then scrutiny colleagues, and members of the previous government over access to minutes of ministerial meetings. Categorically, it was something that myself and other members of the then Chairman's Committee raised with the then Council Ministers, of which Senator Moore, I think, was a member at that point, over access to 2 minutes at that point of ministerial meetings. And the point which the Executive made very, very strongly at that time, which I assume she supported at that time, which I believe still stands now, is that providing full and unredacted minutes, even confidentially, to a small group fundamentally alters the nature of such meetings. And it was, I believe, sir, the then Minister for External Relations, who forcibly made those arguments to us categorically on behalf of the then Council Ministers. And I will just touch on, sir, as well, where unfortunately in confidential briefings there have at times been leaks. I know one was at an officer level within scrutiny, which was very unfortunate, and there's been inadvertent leaks from panels themselves, sir. So given the nature of some of those decisions that we've had to deal with, and sometimes dealing with quite specific and personal nature, and decisions that have to be made dealing with when I say individuals, but circumstances affecting small groups, it is important that that freedom to deal with those areas is there. Because it is human nature to behave and interact and speak differently depending on one's audience. The discussion I might have with a minister, for example, might differ slightly if other ministers are in the room, potentially, or if officers are present, or if that conversation is in public. So context matters. And so introducing an observed element to the specific decisions within competent authorities meetings will, I fear, change them. And now, members may well be of the opinion that this is a price worth paying to ensure that scrutiny of access to the minutes and are able to appreciate the difference of opinion between ministers. However, I would contend that discussions of can, and we are still in a pandemic, will be weaker, potentially less candid, and potentially less useful because of that. So ministers should be free to ask these questions and actually, be told that, no, Minister, you're wrong. We don't really want meetings unduly influence ministers' feeling that they have to make points, say, for political purposes, or not make points because they know that, for the sake of argument, 18 members of scrutiny will read those minutes. We also don't want to drive discussions into the margins of those meetings. And as we've said in the report to this amendment, the proposition could incentivise, if you like, performative interventions by ministers or officers with the express intention to stand out the minutes or, if you like, curry favour of a particular scrutiny panel. Similarly, there's a real danger of officers' advice being more circumspect or even withheld entirely for fear of looking foolish in hindsight. There won't be any sort of blue sky thinking for fear it'll be minuted and misinterpreted in those minutes. And so that will not only make the discussions of the competent authorities far less useful, but it will also weaken our pandemic response itself, because we are, after all, still in a pandemic, and we are entering the winter phase. So, for an example, without a safe space for frank and candid discussions, we might never have had original ideas such as the Spend Local card, or the Safer Travel policy, or the Community Task Force, each of which were refined during CAM discussions before the final policy was agreed. So there is a concern there that there would be less, if you like, blue sky thinking if all discussions, and indeed, more importantly, some of the disagreements were shared. So, but we also recognise the point that actually oversight and scrutiny and understanding of what's going on is incredibly important. So, and as I said, I've been on the other side of this argument, as it were, but at that point, as president of the Chairman's Committee, and actually all of the members of the Chairman's Committee of that day accepted that argument about having a free space to converse. So what this does, and I would hope it's respecting the principle of transparency that we're trying to get to, is this amendment will enable scrutiny properly to review all the agendas, all the papers, all the officer advice, with the exception of legal advice as per the Code of Engagement. And that's quite important, so because actually the original proposition does not address the issue of legal advice and essentially requires it to be provided unredacted. And that then actually also causes us an issue because that is addressed in the code and is obviously not addressed in the proposition. So there is a conflict between those two in our view. So scrutiny will therefore be able to see the same detail as ministers and would understand the basis for the CAM decisions. Now we think that's a good way forward as basically, if you like, a compromise. And also, we'll make sure we'll provide scrutiny of a record of all actions agreed and decisions reached, with a summary of the decision provided as well. That's therefore without compromising the confidentiality of the individual positions of ministers of disagreements within CAM. And so we believe, taken together, this will provide the relevant panels with the decisions reached by CAM and the evidence used to inform and make those decisions. And in our opinion, that is transparent and accountable government whilst observing international norms for how governments make decisions. Now, I absolutely understand why panels would like our minutes, would ask members that to see that we are putting forward what I would hope is taken as a good faith amendment as part of a reasonable solution. And that has exercised our minds quite considerably in terms of how did we address, as I said, for example, the provision of legal advice when that legal advice is is recorded in the minutes. Bear in mind, it specifically says that the minutes cannot be redacted. So this then, as I said, achieves provision of all the information we receive as ministers in making the decisions. I think it's going to be, from my perspective, one would hope it's a fairly straightforward debate. One either agrees with the proposition that we are suggesting from a reasonable point of view, or one goes down the view that actually all we want is the minutes that of the competent authorities ministers. There are potentially unintended consequences that arise out of that, and what we're trying to do is avoid that, allow ministers to continue to have their safe space in the same way that scrutiny members do as well, and therefore do ask members to vote in favour of this amendment to provide more data and transparency to scrutiny without actually imperiling the actual decision-making process of the competent authorities ministers, which actually do take, has been so integral to our pandemic response. On that basis, I make the amendment.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Senator Moore?
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, the amendment is seconded.
Forgive me. Thank you very much, Deputy Gedde. Yes. Senator Moore.
Thank you, sir. So members are perhaps wondering why the scrutiny panel did not simply accept the amendment, albeit that it had come in late. So we most certainly did consider accepting this amendment, and there have been a number of reasons why we have not. Firstly, it has been interesting to listen to the Senator's expressions in his speech. And one of the points that he made was that, well, if we agree to this, then there will be all sorts of other requests to share information. Well, if I could share with Assembly members, there is currently a situation where the State's Employment Board minutes have been requested by the Corporate Services Panel. We received them at the, we hold in our possession some weeks of minutes pertaining to the early part of this term when there was a different chair. However, it stops at that point. But the Public Accounts Committee do have State's Employment Board minutes, and so there are plenty of anomalies in the system already, and there are already examples of minutes being shared with scrutiny panels, and so therefore it makes sense to apply the same norm in this instance and to simply allow, under the Code of Practice and confidentially, the Corporate Services Panel to receive these particular minutes to assist our understanding of the deliberations that do take place. We have also considered the Code of Practice that we have, and we have always abided by that, and there's no evidence of leaks coming from members of scrutiny panels during this term of government. The leaks generally tend to come from governments. The panel also notes the Council of Ministers has sought to provide briefings to scrutiny. States members are more generally, but these tend to happen prior to public announcements and generally in very short timeframes before those public announcements. Therefore, there is no opportunity to do any further research or give proper consideration to other options that may have been available at that time. The amendment could, in fact, create further work for officials who, as we've seen today in some of the issues that have been very apparent in the Assembly with questions unanswered and late amendments being lodged. Officials are already stretched, clearly, within government, and operating different rules for different minutes and different panels only will cause confusion and lead to further mistakes. And so it would be far simpler if simply if it were in the ethos of openness and transparency and inclusive government, which is what we're supposed to experience, that these minutes could be shared, rather than adopting, as I referred to it earlier, a fudge and a workaround option that makes it look like there's transparency, but in fact there isn't. So we already receive the Council of Ministers' agendas and papers, and those agendas and papers tend to be the very same papers that go to the competent authorities' meetings on the COVID topics. It has become very apparent that in fact these papers are considered by 3 different bodies: the Emergencies Council, the Competent Authorities Ministers, and also the Council of Ministers too. Therefore, the considerations are made not once, not twice, but in triplicate, which cannot possibly be a very good, productive use of anybody's time in particular. However, it does fill us with some sense of curiosity, sir, to understand how and why these many meetings do occur to consider the same matters time and time again. So, sir, I simply ask members to think logically about this. This is about adopting similar principles and treating like with like, minutes with minutes, panels with panels. We can all be treated with on a level playing field, sir, and I hope that members will not adopt this amendment and will support the Corporate Services Panel's proposition.
Thank you, Senator. Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. Openness and transparency is a fundamental principle, I think, of government. And I find myself in a position where I think the Chief Minister knows when he puts the question, having made a sort of analytical case for reasons why we need to tone this down, he asked the question, is it a price worth paying for openness and transparency? And I think it is. And I certainly expressed that view when this came along. I personally, I'm obviously having sat at the Council of Ministers table, I was interested at what the Senator said about the minutes of CAM are seen by ministers. I can't recall that myself. I don't think I've seen a set of CAM minutes. I wasn't aware there were 41 meetings. Obviously, what comes out of that is the sort of big decisions. And of course, I'm aware that during the early part of COVID, when we had arguments over closing of schools, we lost an education minister. Oh, what went on? I don't know. Still don't know. What was the balance of advice? I'm hoping that in the fullness of time, we have this inquiry and look back at lessons learned. I think it's going to be really important that we know what the various alternative views was. And I think we should trust the Scrutiny Liaison Committee. We appoint them, we elect them in this Assembly. They're ours. They do a job for us and the public. Now, I agree with the Chief Minister on the point of legal advice. I think that is really difficult because it puts the states and probably contravenes standing orders if material gets into the public domain which breaches, which discloses the advice that we have about the do's and don'ts in such matters. So maybe members might say, well, crikey, you should have put in an amendment to this. Well, okay, hands up on that. I missed that particular point because I think, but I do trust the scrutiny committee. I think they can exercise that judgment on what they do. And of course, there was a couple of things in here which, you know, did worry me a bit. And I must admit, I don't think that I can't remember seeing I'll be honest with you, I don't know what happened with this draft of the report with the amendments. I'm pretty certain I wouldn't have given it endorsed it, because it's got a paragraph in it that really quite surprised me. It says, one of the reasons why we need to make this toning down amendment is that ministers and officers must be at liberty to express their views without being unduly influenced, and this is the phrase, to give performative intervention for the sake of the minutes. What does that mean? People see it as a theatre. Well, I don't. When I'm at Council of Ministers, there's only one issue I've got in my mind. Is this in the interests of the island or not? Performative interventions. And then it goes on. Equally, participants could be dissuaded from giving an opinion or be circumspect with their advice, and here's these words, for fear of looking foolish in hindsight. Well, cracky, if that's the way politics is, I don't want any of it. Performance, looking foolish. I know the Chief Minister spoke about politicians worth their salt. Well, maybe my viewpoint doesn't make me worth my salt. I prefer to deal with openness, the truth, say what you think, as I'm doing now. It won't make me popular. So, on balance, I would like to see an amendment that dealt with the issue of the legal advice, but I think having a situation where real big decisions have been made about which affect people's lives, businesses, and in many, I have to also life and death decisions. Life and death decisions. I think it's important that there is a record of that, and I trust that our scrutiny team will exercise discretion. I don't think they're going to go on a search for the guilty, if that's what the fear is. No, it's about lessons learned. As Deputy Martin reminded us earlier, and I think she spoke so well, put your hands up, who hasn't made a mistake? There we are. So I'm going to not vote for the amendment, and I shall not vote to speak again, but I shall certainly be voting for the main proposition.
Thank you. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. I think that was an excellent speech by Deputy Young, and raised many of the points that I want to make, but also at risk of repeating myself, not from today's debate so far, but from previous debates that we've had on various issues over the past 3 years. I remind members that in my mind I'm a states member first, and all my other positions, whether it's government or scrutiny or anything else, come second to that. And I think often, particularly members of government, not just this government, previous governments too, need to remind themselves that they're states members first and members of the government second. And they serve as members of the government at the leisure and the pleasure of the States Assembly. And I'm not sure which end of my speech I want to start at, but I'll try and find where the beginning is. But and all of this brings to my mind one of the real concerns I have about ministerial government, sir. And it's interesting because at the moment I'm also reading a draft of our Democratic Accountability Report that's been ongoing for the past few months. And my big concern about ministerial government, sir, is an observation that I make when not just looking at this assembly and this jurisdiction, but many other jurisdictions, principally major nations around the world. And I realise that in a system of ministerial government, the moment you create that government, that executive government, and separate it in some way from the legislature, you end up with a situation where that government and those ministers want increasing amounts of powers, and they want decreasing amounts of accountability, and they want decreasing amounts of transparency. And that's what I see happening here, but I've also seen it happening in the UK. The Henry VIII laws that the Prime Minister was trying to, or did invoke with regard to certain provisions around Brexit. We see the games that are played in the UK constantly to avoid accountability of the government by opposition parties in that case, because they don't have a real scrutiny system in the UK. In the US, we see it happening where the executive under the previous US administration was doing everything it could to avoid accountability to Congress and accountability to the people in many different ways. And we've seen the extreme that has led to in the US. Because when you have a government without accountability, and when you have a government without transparency, when ministers operate in that sort of environment, then they begin to operate in a very untoward manner, and they can start making decisions which benefit them rather than benefit the people of the jurisdiction that they're operating in. And so that's the context in which I view this proposition and this amendment. And I do note, and I do think it's important to note, that in this assembly we switch roles. 2.5 years I served in scrutiny, and I'm incredibly proud of that. I've spent just under a year on the edges of government learning from that. And it's that learning that I'm trying to bring to this particular debate. After the election, those of us who are returned have no idea whether we're going to be in ministerial government or in scrutiny. And if there are ministers, and I'm sure there are ministers here today who will be in scrutiny next time, they will suddenly realise why it is that propositions like this crop up, why it is that Deputy Pamplin fought to get the Stack minutes released. They will understand that when they're in scrutiny. But there are many members of this government who have not served in scrutiny. What surprises me, and this is the lesson I think we all need to learn, is that there are members of this government who were in scrutiny in the last assembly, and their behaviour has changed quite significantly. When they were in scrutiny, they wanted that transparency, they wanted that accountability, and quite rightly so. I backed them then, and I back them now. But now they're ministers, they're not so keen, sir. And it's that fact, and it's not just these ministers, it happened under the previous assembly, and it happened the previous assembly before that, and this is the problem. We're on a journey whereby each successive government takes more and more power for itself, weakening the legislature at each turn. P1 2018, one of the last acts of the previous government was, in my view, a dishonourable act, and it weakened this legislature significantly. It was something that then Chief Minister should not be happy when he looks back at that, because he got that wrong very clearly, and it weakened this assembly, sir. Now, I know that there are parties, not the one that I sit next to, who actually are approaching this election with the view that they want scrutiny out of the way, that they see that in government, scrutiny, in their view, is in the way. That worries and concerns me enormously. That's why I have raised in this assembly that scrutiny needs to be protected if we are going down the route of party politics, which I'm less and less convinced we are, by the way. But it is that attitude which ministers in this assembly today do hold. They believe that scrutiny is wrong because it stops them achieving what they want to achieve in their temporary positions. Always remember this, you are a minister temporarily. You are a blip in time. And there will be people after you who have to pick up the reins where you left, and you may well end up back in scrutiny, and you'll be wanting that transparency back again. As islanders, we deserve transparency. And COVID has really brought some elements to the fore, principally elements such as the Emergencies Council's law, or the Emergencies Law, which is not fit for purpose, which actually, and I brought this up in scrutiny when we had a briefing on it in 2019, the Emergency Council's law actually has no protection in it. The Chief Minister could invoke that law at any point, irrespective or not of whether there is an emergency. The next Chief Minister could be elected Chief Minister one day and the next day invoke the Emergency Council's law and set up the competent authorities and rule this island from the competent authorities as long as that Chief Minister wishes. There is nothing in the law to stop that happening. There is nothing in the law that says when the competent authorities should be disbanded when an emergency is stopped, per se. Nothing at all. And this island has actually been ruled by the competent authorities since March 2020. We've had 41 meetings of the competent authorities, most of which, probably about 35 of which, I have had no clue were taking place. We have no real understanding of what goes on in the competent authorities. Ministers who are not in the competent authorities should be angry about that, because they do not know what is going on in the competent authorities. Now, I do accept competent authorities have been benign. In the main, I believe they have acted in the island's interests. But that is not something that we can guarantee in future years. And we see that when we look at the UK and we look at the USA and other governments around the world. We cannot trust that the competent authorities will always be benign. We cannot trust that future ministers will always be benign and act in the right way. And it's for that reason, in an island where we have no military, we have no nuclear secrets, we have no biochemical weapons, we have no, to my knowledge, intelligence services. We do not need secrets in this way. And honestly, the term safe space, if I turn to that, it's one of those terms which makes my skin crawl. If you need a safe space as a politician, then you really should not be a politician. It's that simple. We stand up and put our heads above the parapet on a daily basis, and it's tough. And there are times when I know, just in my minor role in government or my role in scrutiny, it's been really tough. And I've wondered whether I shouldn't have kept my mouth shut. I do wonder that, by the way, quite often. You know, whether I shouldn't have spoken out about X or Y or, you know, whatever it may be. It's a tough job, and I do know that. But safe spaces are not for us. We discuss things that determine other people's lives, that determine the future of other people's lives, the way they interact with each other, the safety, the laws under which they go. All of that should be noted, minuted, and made available to this Assembly and to the scrutiny panels that oversee the work of the government. And I use that term, oversee the work of the government. They are not below the government. The government, as I started, comes from this Assembly, it serves at the pleasure of this Assembly, and it can be stopped by this Assembly. And so, sir, it really is about democracy. This debate, whilst seen as minor, we saw earlier today how apparently minor debates can become much bigger debates than we expected. This minor debate is about democracy at its absolute heart, and democracy in this island, which I vow to protect as long as I can, and as long as I have a vote in this Assembly. I will do everything I can to maintain the power in this Assembly. And I know there are people who wish otherwise, who want to just rule with an iron fist and get through what they wish to get through, regardless of what other people may think or what effects those may have. So that's the context from which I'm speaking. Now, more specifically about the minutes. I find it amusing, to be honest with you, when we have a report which talks about minutes as though they are a transcript. Minutes are not a transcript. In fact, I would say it's almost a mistake in the original proposition to ask for the unredacted minutes. And the reason I say that is because minutes are, by their nature, a redaction. No set of minutes tells you exactly what was said in that meeting. And in fact, a well-trained and very experienced minute taker will exercise the discretion of a minute taker when writing those minutes. And indeed, I've been in the odd meeting or two, I said, please don't minute that. Usually because I've used a word I shouldn't have used. And that's what happens with minutes. They are an outline sketch of the conversation that took place. And so when Competent Authority Minister A says to Competent Authority Minister B, I don't agree with your proposition on this matter, we will have, and that takes place as a conversation, we will have in the minutes a note which says a discussion took place between Competent Authority Minister A and Competent Authority Minister B, the outcome of which was, and they agreed on such and such a matter. That's what it says. It doesn't tell you in great depth what each minister said, how they insulted each other, how they threw their arms up in despair at the other's ridiculous arguments, and so on and so forth. It just gives you that outline sketch. And islanders have a right to know what Competent Authority Minister A said to be in that meeting, given that that meeting in the past year has taken away their rights and freedoms of islanders. So there is no way that this amendment, which is a weakening amendment, should be allowed to pass. Scrutiny want those minutes. Scrutiny should have those minutes. I do trust scrutiny, and in fact, I know for a fact that when I was in scrutiny, the confidentiality of confidential documents was our highest priority, because we knew in scrutiny, or we know in scrutiny, that the moment scrutiny leaks things, the government will be all over it, telling the world how scrutiny is leaked and scrutiny can't be trusted. Scrutiny does not leak. Council of Ministers leaks. That's where leaks take place, not in scrutiny. So yes, Deputy Young is absolutely right when he says you can trust scrutiny with regard to confidentiality. And I back him entirely on that. That was entirely my experience, because scrutiny is scared of the government throwing up its arms in despair at scrutiny. It knows that it is in a weaker position than the government. It doesn't have the resources in the same length, the same depth of resources as Deputy Ward said earlier today. So, sir, this amendment fails to acknowledge the reality of minutes. They are not a transcript. It fails to acknowledge the needs of islanders in being able to see entirely transparently how decisions within the Emergencies Council are made. As an aside, the Emergencies Council law needs to be seriously updated, and it needs to happen fast. Now, it was meant to happen in 2019. It didn't happen. I don't know why. Strangely enough, it's been in use for the 2 years since. And it worries me, sir, that, to be honest, there is nothing in law to stop the Chief Minister keeping the Emergencies Council and the competent authorities operating until the end of this Assembly. It doesn't matter what the pandemic's doing. There's absolutely nothing to stop him doing that. I'm sure he won't, and I hope to goodness he won't do that. So, sir, please, I ask members, reject the amendment. Scrutiny want the minutes. The minutes are not a transcript. Ministers do not need such a safe space as they are talking about. Ministers can always ask for a comment and not be minuted. That's absolutely fine. Scrutiny is asking for the approved minutes. So that's minutes after they have gone to ministers for their approval. So believe me, they do not need any further redaction. And yes, please do reject this amendment. It is unnecessary. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy St Mary.
Thanks, and I'm pleased to follow Deputy Morell, but I guess sure I'll be somewhat briefer than him. I'd like to go back to the basic point that this provision of minutes in redacted form, a panel on which I currently serve has recently been through this experience, and we did receive minutes heavily redacted going over a 2-year period, and we couldn't make it head or tail of it. We had to go back, and the minister concerned did relax his requirement, and we got them in better format. But the purpose of our receiving them or requesting them was to enable us to fully understand the motivation for this, that, or other provision. And without that information, they were useless. So it is not an academic argument. If scrutiny is to have a full understanding of what is going on at ministerial level, we do need to see redacted minutes. And as Deputy Morell says, they are minutes. The minutes themselves are not a verbatim account of what happened, and if there are embarrassing things which they can don't wish to be made public, not public, made available even to scrutiny, then they can be amended at that stage. I do accept the point, by the way, that officers might be more concerned about their own identity being revealed, and I accept that is the code. I think that they would not be named, but that does not apply to ministers. So that is my main point, sir. And again, as Deputy Morell said, these minutes are not available to the public. They are being made available to the scrutiny panel in confidence. And I'm sure all panels have this qualification on occasion. The panel on which I currently serve and which Deputy Mayor was previously chairman included minutes or information received from External Relations Minister. And we are extremely conscious of the sensitivity that some information we received could have if revealed. And I suspect sometimes we might receive information prior to other ministers, and quite right too. But all panels are acutely aware of the sensitivity. The minutes are not being made available for the public. We, again, as Deputy Morell said, if we did let slip any confidential information, we would be hounded, and correctly so, for having done that, and it would upset the whole scrutiny balance. So I do not see the need for that. And if the ministers accept scrutiny, accept the integrity of scrutiny to treat matters with confidentiality, there is no need to resist providing minutes unredacted. And the other point I have, and I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer in this. I've been comparing the the original proposition with the amendment. The original proposition requests any approved minutes of meetings of the competent authorities to be shared in confidence. The amendment is a similar request for agendas, papers and actions agreed at meetings to be shared. My own interpretation is that term papers would include minutes, so I'm not quite sure on that basis, even if the amendment was passed. I do question whether that prevents minutes being provided in unredacted form. But I revert to my basic point, sir, that there should be no need to redact minutes if scrutiny is prepared to do its job and if the ministers want it to do its job. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other wish to speak on the amendment? Yes, Deputy Sadia.
Thank you, sir. I was looking back on a couple of propositions that I had lodged in the past to do with greater transparency when it comes to government and their meetings. And I was reminded that in both 2011 and 2014, I had submitted propositions to ask for Council of Ministers meetings to take place in public. Not for the entirety of their meetings, because even I acknowledged that there would be matters that they wished to discuss on a B agenda, which were potentially policy information. And the reason I lodged the proposition was because I became aware that there was a lot of lip service being paid to transparency, accountability and openness, but then when it push came to shove, the actions didn't follow the words. And so I was heartened that even though the proposition lost, some of the people who had committed in their manifestos, including my good colleague at St Brillard, Deputy Truscott, he'll probably remember this. He was one of those who got elected in 2014, put in his manifesto. He was committed to openness and transparency, and did indeed vote for that proposition, which I thought was a moderate one, because it was about greater engagement with the public. But that said, so what Deputy Morell said, I don't entirely agree with it. I think it is valid for ministers, similar to scrutiny panels, to be able to speak freely and openly, and have perhaps zany ideas, to have blue sky thinking, to think about counterfactuals that they wouldn't necessarily want the media to report on, simply because I don't think any of us can fully trust context to always be taken into account. And so it is right, I think, that there are items that any politicians, and Deputy Morell may wish to be careful of what he wishes for, because he may well be a senior minister after the next election, and he will need those safe spaces to know that ideas are being discussed that aren't going to end up being misinterpreted on the front page of the Jersey Evening Post. That said, I don't think this is quite what we're debating here today, and it does seem a bit of a mishmash. I think the point here is that this isn't knowledge that is going to be made public. This is about scrutiny having access to meaningful information that isn't being redacted beyond recognition. And the point is, I guess, is that we don't really know what the minutes say. So one would hope that minutes are taken to satisfy the people who attended the meeting, to make sure that what was said is a fair reflection of what they meant. That's certainly what I look for in minutes at meetings that I've attended and where I've spoken, to make sure that what I've said hasn't been misinterpreted and that all of the important points have been recorded. So similarly, I don't think it can be taken as read that there will be nothing interesting or controversial recorded in the minutes, because it depends on the terms, if you like, the understanding that was made when those minutes were recorded. So I think there are probably lots of ideas that need to be taken into account after this discussion today as to what, in fact, we expect minutes to record. But I think it is fair to say that if you don't expect the minutes to be made public, then you can be more free and easy with what you record in the minutes if it's only for your enclosed group to have access to them. So that said, sir, the principle, of course, is that the scrutiny panel should have access to all the information that they wish to have access to. And I'll leave the thoughts there, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any of them wish to speak on this? Yes, Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. I'll be brief because Deputy Tadier said a number of things I was going to say. Looking at the amendment, there was the one paragraph which Deputy Young mentioned as well. Ministers and officers must be at liberty to express their views without being unduly influenced to give performative interventions for the sake of the minutes. Now, I agree with Deputy Young about that particular phrase. It isn't a performance. You're saying what you think, or at least I would hope they would, and they should be able to say what they say in private meetings and what they should say in public, because I don't believe there should be a difference between the two. It says, equally, participants could be dissuaded from giving an opinion or be circumspect with their advice for fear of looking foolish in hindsight. Now, some of the people who are giving this advice are very, very well-paid high civil servants who were earning maybe 3 times the salary of a states member. And I would like to think that the advice they're giving is sound and wouldn't be thought to be foolish, but if it isn't, I'd like to know. And so these minutes, I think, should be available to the scrutiny panel to be able to look at. I might add, by the way, this argument was also given by the law officers about us seeing their advice, because I can remember meetings to do with the Children's Commissioner and whether she should have full information. And I know that Deputy Mezek wasn't prepared to go along with full disclosure on that. So, I'm sorry, Senator, it is true, because I remember the meeting.
No, through the chair.
Sorry, through the chair, sir. So what I'm trying to say is the officers were arguing that we should not have the information because law officers, would not be prepared to give their opinion. They're highly professional people, lots of knowledge and experience, and I can't believe they would fear not giving their information out. They're doing it in good faith. It should be accepted in that way. And we should not be put off seeing minutes simply because they would be dissuaded from giving an opinion. I don't believe that. And if they are, they're in the wrong job. So I will support this. Thank you.
Senator Mezek.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Higgins gives me an opportunity to correct him while still supporting the ultimate position of opposing this amendment so minutes can be produced. His recollection of my position when the Children's Commissioner law was being created may well have been a reflection of meetings that that he attended that I was in as well. But buried somewhere in the Council of Ministers' records will be minutes showing that I supported full disclosure for Children's Commissioner. But as all things that government does, they end up being a democratic piece of work where you occasionally have to beat other people's positions to get something over the line. And were those minutes available, Deputy Higgins wouldn't be able to inadvertently misrepresent my position there. And isn't it a good thing to have minutes accessible to those who are holding people in power to account? So he has actually helpfully provided an example of why this amendment should be opposed and the main proposition supported. It is important for those who are holding government to account to have the information at their disposal so they can do that job properly, I think. And I think the amendment as proposed by the Council of Ministers gives ministers and their staff extra work when really it would be much simpler to simply pass them on the minutes. I, for one, think scrutiny can be trusted with that, and therefore I would urge members to oppose the amendment from the Council of Ministers and support the main proposition.
Thank you. Deputy Labby.
Thanks, sir. I just wondered if I could ask a question of the Attorney General at this point. Is it the case that if this proposition is approved unamended, that legal advice given by Crown officers to this committee would be in the minutes and distributed to scrutiny as they're asking for?
Attorney General.
Sir, it may be that you think that the wording of a proposition is a matter for you rather than for me. But for my part, if it assists, the proposition as unamended refers to shared in confidence and without redactions by the Chief Minister with that committee for distribution to the relevant scrutiny panels. So for my part, I would view the words without redactions as meaning that the minutes are to be distributed without redactions for legal advice. But as I say, sir, the wording of a proposition is traditionally a matter for the presiding officer.
Sir, in which case, could I ask the Attorney General if that would compromise his office in any way?
Attorney General.
So yes, is the short answer, because I believe it's accepted by scrutiny that legal advice is confidential, and there is a public interest in public authorities whom I advise not being inhibited in seeking legal advice for fear that in some future date the fact that they sought legal advice and the contents of that legal advice would be disclosed. So it is pretty much universally accepted that the right to take legal advice is confidential. It is a fundamental principle that lawyers, when they give legal advice, there is confidentiality in that advice, and the advice is not normally published. Those principles are recorded in it's the current code of practice for engagement between scrutiny panels and the PAC and the executive, which is P56 of 2018, and the relevant paragraphs are, I believe, yes, there is a section on legal advice, which is at paragraphs 36 through to 39, and the reasons for confidentiality is expressly accepted in that code of practice. So there is an exception in paragraph 39 whereby panel, I'll read it, panel and PAC members recognise and accept that ministers and their officials will maintain their claim to legal advice privilege, except in exceptional circumstances, if questioned by a panel stroke PAC, and will not seek to interfere with that privilege. Such exceptional circumstances are likely to arise only where there is a coordinated law officer, ministerial and scrutiny stroke PAC approach to the release of the advice, where there would be no adverse impact on actual or possible legal proceedings in court, and where there would be no undesirable precedent set as a result. In such circumstances, the written prior permission of the Attorney General must be obtained before the advice is disclosed to a panel stroke PAC, and also before any legal advice or reference to it is published by the panel stroke PAC. So that is the existing and agreed code of practice which governs legal advice. So in this case, I am aware, because I have reviewed the minutes, I am aware that legal advice is recorded in the minutes. In my view, that legal advice would be capable of redaction, and I would urge, if the Assembly is minded to go down with any release of minutes to scrutiny, as a very bare minimum, the legal advice does need to be redacted from those minutes. That should be a relatively straightforward task, and would not, in my view, take much time. But I'm not, having reviewed that legal advice, I'm not persuaded that it would come within the exception which is set out in paragraph 39 of the Code of Practice, which I've just read out. I trust that assists the Deputy.
Yes, I'd like to thank the Attorney. It's certainly very helpful. Could I just ask one further thing? That the proposition, as it's the proposition unamended, is unequivocal and expressly states without redactions. So if the Assembly passes this, the proposition unamended, the minutes surely have to be presented unredacted, as expressly stated.
So that is the logical consequence of the passing of the proposition. It may be that scrutiny would take a different view and would agree that the legal advice should be redacted. But on the strict wording of the proposition, the legal advice would not be redacted from the minutes.
Could I ask a question of the AG?
me too,
Yes, there are questions in the chat as well for you, Mr. Attorney. The first one, I think, in time, you're the second one in time, Deputy Higgins. The first one in time comes from Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. I've got three related questions, sir, so I'll try and make them as concise as possible. So the first question, sir, is it the case that whilst there's a presumption of confidentiality in legal advice generally, that it is possible to waive the confidentiality, and could the Attorney General clarify under what circumstances, or rather how would that waiving of the confidentiality be achieved? Would it be sufficient for him to waive the confidentiality, or for the Council of Ministers to do so?
So yes, I can assist the Deputy with his question. So it would take both the competent authorities, ministers, and me as well, to waive the privilege in the legal advice, because both the in relation to law officers' advice, both the party who seeks the advice and to whom the advice is given, and also the law officer themselves, both have privilege in the advice. So it would need both myself, the law officer, and the party who sought the advice to agree that the confidentiality and the privilege in that advice can be waived.
So I suppose the supplementary to that is that if it is the will of this assembly that the legal advice, the minutes be released unredacted, then would that be taken as a signal to both parties that the public interest would lie in the legal advice being disclosed?
Well, the Assembly obviously is a sovereign body and has got powers to resolve in the way this proposition in the way that it chooses. However, I would hope that the members of the Assembly, each and every member of the Assembly, would understand the importance of the principle of a party being able to take confidential legal advice. That is a central principle which I believe is pretty much universally accepted in most modern democracies.
And so I'll make this the last question, although I had another one, but I've used it up as a supplementary. Does the Attorney General acknowledge that his department is different from that of normal lawyers in the sense that he often gives legal advice in public? In fact, that's exactly what he's doing to us now. And of course, if we ask him a question now, which is exactly the same as what he will be asked in confidence by the Council of Ministers, he is presumably duty-bound to give the same answer, because is that correct, sir? So does he acknowledge that there is a case, actually, when the public interest test is met, that legal advice could be disclosed, if not to the public, certainly to a scrutiny panel?
Sir, yes, I do accept that I would give, if I'm asked to advise on the same question, in the way that I'm asked in the Assembly, I'm asked questions and I give legal advice, then I provide the same answer to the Assembly as I would give in private to a minister or a backbencher or a member of the scrutiny panel. It would be the same answer, but obviously when I give advice to the Assembly, by definition that is in public, whereas when I give advice to a minister or a backbencher or to scrutiny, that is done confidentially and in private. That is a different situation from my giving public advice to the Assembly. So in terms of the public interest in disclosure of legal advice, I believe that is dealt with in the Code of Practice for engagement between scrutiny panels, the PAC and the Executive. And it's already dealt with in paragraph 39, which was the paragraph I read out a few minutes ago, which does accept that there are exceptional circumstances, but it does require coordinated law officer, ministerial and scrutiny stroke PAC agreement to the release of the advice. And as I've said earlier, for my part, I do not agree that the advice that has been given confidentially and in private to ministers would fall within that exception in this case.
Thank you.
Should I just finish my speech and then I'll have nothing more to...
Well, I think there are quite a few questions for the attorney which we need to have resolved first. Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. First of all, would the attorney agree that if the information is being shared between the competent authority and scrutiny, it's not necessarily being shared with the public, and it's not the same sort of problems about the information getting out to the public. It's going to be given on a confidential basis. If it's retained in that way, then the law officers have nothing to worry about. Is that not the case?
It is envisaged, I believe, in the Code of Practice that confidentiality would apply. There are two limbs that are covered by paragraph 39. There is both disclosure to the panel or PAC, and then there is the second question of publication of that advice. So there are two different situations. This is dealing with the first of those two situations. This proposition is dealing with the first of those two situations, which is disclosure to PAC. But nevertheless, disclosure to PAC is dealt with in accordance with those principles which I've just read out in paragraph 39. It takes a coordinated approach and it needs agreement between law officers, ministers and scrutiny in order for those, if this is truly one of those exceptional circumstances. And as I've said, this, in my view, is not one of those cases.
Following through,
yes,
sir?
Deputy Higgins.
I must admit, I find part of that argument difficult to understand here, because for a start, the scrutiny panel is receiving the same information that was given to the minister. It's simple as that. And if it's confidential, I don't see what the issue is. And I would also say, too, is it not the case that law officers regularly give advice to ministers on a particular issue and also give different advice to scrutiny panels who will be asking questions on the same topic? So it doesn't necessarily follow. It's always exactly the same advice that's given. And therefore, in this particular case, all we're saying is the information that has been given to the competent authority is going to go to scrutiny. They'll be able to read it. They're not going to publish it, but they'll have a much better understanding of the advice.
So I think I'm at risk of repeating myself in that I have reviewed the minutes, I have reviewed the legal advice given, and in my view, this is not a situation where I can agree to disclosure of the legal advice. It covers a multitude of situations. It was given confidentially, and I do not believe that it would fall within the exceptional circumstances that are set out in paragraph 39 of the Code of Practice.
Sorry, one final question, if I may. If it's going back to what Deputy Taddy mentioned, if it's the will of the Assembly that this is done, will that override what's in the document you just mentioned?
Well, that puts it puts the competent authorities, ministers, and me in a very difficult situation. And it is precisely that sort of situation which the Code of Practice, I assume, in part is designed to avoid. The will of the Assembly would have been made clear on this proposition. In terms of whether competent authorities, ministers comply with that request, it will put them in a very, very difficult situation, and one which they will have to think about quite carefully. Certainly it puts me in a very awkward situation.
So I have a question for the...
Well, that's you can join the list of people with questions for the attorney, and I'll put you on it now, Deputy Ward. Senator Valois.
Yes, just briefly, sir, and I thank the Attorney General for providing the information, but I find this question rather superfluous in terms of the original proposition, Attorney General, doesn't suggest any amendments to the Code of Conduct between government and scrutiny. It does refer to an unredacted minutes. However, you have referred to exceptional circumstances. And you referred to the logical consequence in response to Deputy Labby, but not the legal consequence. So can I ask that if this proposition was passed unamended, the Code of Conduct could still be used with reference to the fact that legal advice isn't shared and that you have superiority over that decision making, and that we can enable a process to move forward in that respect?
Well, I thank the Senator for her question, but I go back to the advice I gave in relation to Deputy Labby's question, in that the wording of the proposition states without redactions. The wording of the report, which accompanies the proposition, makes no reference to redactions for legal advice and them not being provided. So whilst the Senator may herself have that view, others might have a different view on the wording of the proposition and require the provision of the legal advice.
Deputy St Mary.
Thank you, sir, and I apologise for pursuing the Attorney General further, but my question is a very simple one. It goes back to my address. The main change between the amendment and the original proposition is that the proposition refers to requesting approved minutes without redaction. The amendment refers to agendas, papers and actions without redactions. Is a case for arguing that the word papers includes minutes in any event, in which case it would perhaps make the amendment unnecessary?
So yes, I thank the Deputy for his question. There is that argument, but nevertheless the report does state expressly, that the report to the amendment, that is, it does state expressly it excluding legal advice. So the reference to agendas, papers and officer advice, brackets, excluding legal advice. It is at least clear what is intended by the amendment, that it is not intended to include the provision of legal advice amongst papers.
I thank the Attorney General for that, but I wasn't intending to cover legal advice. It was a simple point, really. If legal advice was not involved and officers were simply asked to redact minutes for whatever reason, wouldn't that be covered? Ignoring the question of legal advice.
Sorry, we seem to be at cross purposes, and I'm not entirely sure what the Deputy means by his question. The wording of the amendment is to provide agendas, papers and actions agreed of the meeting. So excluding legal advice, then the obligation is to provide those documents unamended. But the amendment, the report to the amendment, expressly states that it is to exclude legal advice.
Yes, sorry to again pursue it, but if therefore I was ignoring any legal advice, and I accept the point made about legal advice, if there's no legal advice involved, would not on request of papers by the appropriate panel, would that not be a request for the committee to produce minutes in unredacted form, assuming there's no legal advice involved?
Well, again, sir, we are in the territory of what does the wording of the proposition mean, or the proposition as amended mean, and it may be that that is a matter for the presiding officer.
Yes, I think that's more a matter for me,
rather than
the question you've just asked.
Apologies, sir.
St Mary. If you want to ask that of me again, it's clear that the intent of the amendment is to remove minutes from the ambit of the proposition. And that's the way I construe it, if that answers your question.
So can I just ask a question of you as well on interpretation?
Well,
it is interpretation. Since I've been
I
in the
just want to
Assembly...
get through the question of the Attorney first.
Very well, sir.
Deputy Ward has a question for the Attorney.
Thank you, sir. And it's getting increasingly difficult to really unpick the implications that are being suggested. I suppose it's about primacy of the law and the code of conduct. I interpret this, and I may be wrong, that if we are agreeing this as unamended, it would mean, and this is the question, so forgive me, I have to give it a context, so I can try and understand it myself as much as anything. If we agree this, it means that minutes will be sent to the scrutiny panel, not publicly, but to the scrutiny panel, and we will see those minutes. But surely the code of conduct kicks in, if I can't think of a better way of putting it, as soon as minutes go to the scrutiny panel. So the issues around redaction of law officers' advice and what that advice is would kick in there. Now, the rights and wrongs with that, I think, are another issue. Whether or not scrutiny should see those, I think, is another issue, and it's being conflated here. I'd ask the Attorney General, would it not be within this proposition to simply say, yes, minutes that you get, but as with any minutes that come to the scrutiny panel, the same code of conduct kicks in, i.e. you do not get access to the legal advice that was given and whether the legal advice was there. An example is if you get minutes from COM, if legal advice is there, we wouldn't see that either. So because there is a code of conduct for scrutiny that kicks in. I hope that makes sense, sir, but I think that's the thing that's confusing me. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
So I hope this will assist the Deputy in that the Code of Practice is very clear that it's paragraph 38. It's accepted that advice given by law officers to a minister or to the Council of Ministers or to departmental officials and/or the fact that advice has been sought will not be disclosed. So it's not to be disclosed. But that is at odds with the wording of the proposition as unamended, because it does expressly state it is to be without redactions. And the only way that the minutes or potentially other papers could be disclosed where they contain legal advice is to redact that legal advice before it goes to scrutiny.
So if I ask the Attorney General, if there was legal advice in minutes of Council of Ministers that are sent to scrutiny panels, would the scrutiny panel automatically not get those minutes, or would they just be redacted?
So we are going somewhat round in circles. In my view, they should be redacted, but on the wording of the proposition, they go to the scrutiny panel unredacted.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. SPAC and engagement between States Employment Board and the law officers were mentioned. I looked through the minutes, and when we received minutes, we didn't receive legal advice within the minutes. We said that it was follow legal advice. The legal advice was discussed later on in private meetings. Now, the current proposition mentioned PAC, or at least during the proposal mentioned PAC, and the minutes that are requested was similar that PAC received from SCB when the legal advice was deducted by default because of the code of conduct. Now, if my understanding, I'm not sure if it's to Attorney General or sir to yourself, if my understanding is correct, and SPC was used as an example that received the minutes and confidentiality, which we are very grateful, would it be the same precedent for the minutes of the competent authority in this case?
Obviously, I'm not giving legal advice. That's a matter for the attorney. As to the effect of the proposition, that on request, any approved minutes of meetings of the competent authorities ministers should be shared in confidence and without redactions by the Chief Minister with the committee for distribution to the relevant panels. On the face of it, that would lead to minutes in their entirety being disclosed, which, if there was reference to legal advice in those minutes, would include legal advice. The points that is made by the attorney is, of course, this isn't legislation, it's a proposition, doesn't create law, but as Deputy Tadier reminds us, it's a declaration, if you like, by the members of the Assembly as to their view of the public interest, and an indication as to how the Assembly believes, if adopted, these matters should be dealt with. Having said that, it doesn't, the proposition, purport to expressly disapply or depart from the code of practice or code of conduct, which is a point that was made by Senator Valois and Deputy Ward. And it's really perhaps, in some respects, a matter for the proposer to deal with in her summing up as to whether or not her intention and wish in respect of the desire to receive minutes without reductions does extend to departing from the current practice, so that it would include advice from the Attorney General if contained in the minutes. And if that is the case, then it gives rise to a potential future conflict in the way the attorney is described. Senator Moore.
If questioning is still a possibility
Yes.
To the Attorney General, I would like to ask the Attorney what rules and guidelines there are for the GREF in their minute taking, and whether there are particular guidelines that are set out in particular to help them when they do take those minutes, and particularly with regards to legal advice. And what is your understanding, Mr. Attorney, of that advice?
So I'm not really sure that that's a legal question. It's about guidelines for the GREF. And I must
It's
say
not a legal question. If you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer.
No, I don't know the answer.
Yes.
So perhaps
that's a question
then,
that the GREF would be able to answer for you. But
well, indeed,
of course,
but if perhaps the attorney had given us the opportunity to understand his position before this sitting, then it might have been possible. And I would imagine that as the attorney has taken such efforts to look back at the code of practice, etc., ahead of this meeting, then he would in fact be aware of what those guidelines are, as I am, sir.
Yes. Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Yes, Constable of St. One.
Sir, I thought Deputy Labby was.
Oh, Deputy Labby, you're about to make your speech. Sorry.
No, I don't want to make a speech. I want to ask a point to the attorney, please, sir.
All right. Perhaps we'll come to your question first.
Sorry, we've got a question for the attorney. Sorry, Mr. Attorney, can I just ask, as a result of the significant advice you've given us, could you just confirm that if this proposition was passed unamended, would you find it difficult to provide advice to the ministerial group in question?
Well, sir, I obviously refer to the advice that you've just, or the ruling that you've just given, or the guidance that you've just given in relation to what the wording of the proposition means, and whether the mover of the proposition would concede that legal advice is not to be provided. So that would be material to my answer. But if the legal advice, if the mover of the proposition were to say, no, she wants the legal advice to be included amongst the minutes, then it would put me in a much more uncomfortable position, because I would constantly be thinking, well, in the future, how would this advice, as it's recorded in the minutes, look to some third party who the advice is not given to, who doesn't understand the context for the advice? How would that look? And how would it look if it's published to the world at large, who may also, well, will also not be in the same position as the person who's asked for the advice in that particular situation? So it would put me in a more difficult position. And in response perhaps to other questions that might arise from that answer, members do need to understand that law officers are giving advice on sensitive issues, and it is very important that that advice is frank and does not flinch from expressing the legal consequences of certain actions that may follow if the advice is not agreed with, or if it is agreed with. So it is very important that, well, any lawyer, and particularly law officers, are able to give frank advice. And I do say that it is the same advice that's given to ministers, to the Council of Ministers, to backbenchers. Again, backbenchers need to be confident that the advice that is given to them by law officers is confidential, is frank, and doesn't flinch away from the consequences of following or not following the advice on the particular question that is being asked. So that is the overall policy context for why legal advice is confidential, and why law officers' advice, it's particularly important that it does remain confidential, and that it is only in exceptional circumstances, as set out in paragraph 39 of the Code of Practice, that it's disclosed, or possibly even published.
So, can I follow through with the question, please, again, sir? In response to what the attorney's just said?
Well, you're not. If you've got a further question, that's fine, but not a response, because we need to make some progress with the debate. If you've got a question, yes, a new question. That's
okay,
fine.
my question is, sir, that the attorney says the advice is the same to all. I've been told in the past that the advice given by law officers to government can differ from the advice that's been given to scrutiny panels and to members, because very often the advice goes beyond an interpretation of the law and may recommend a course of action and so on. So there are things that are not strictly legal that are part of that advice which may not be shared. Is that correct or not?
Well, it may be that the Deputy is aware of specific instances of advice which may have differed, but as a matter of general principle, no, it's not correct. If the same question is being asked in the same circumstances, it will be the same legal advice. It may be that in the past there have been developments which are different or are new to when advice is given to a backbencher from when it's given to a minister. And the reason I would assume for any difference is that there have been developments which might explain any difference between the two sets of advice. But as a matter of general principle, if the same question is asked about the same facts, the same circumstances, the same advice is given.
So I do apologise. Can I just ask one more question?
Yes.
So I don't know if it's a point of order, but if it is, I don't know where I'll ask it. Is it not the fact that this amendment unamended does not change the code of conduct, and so therefore legally the code of conduct still applies? So therefore I understand the notion of redacted, and that's unfortunate that that word's there, but the code of conduct will still apply, which means that legal advice would not be passed on, because it's the code of conduct that underlies the use of legal advice throughout what we do in scrutiny, council ministers, backbenchers, etc.
Well, I think that's, I've answered that already. It does not expressly attempt to alter the terms of the Code of Conduct, but there may be an argument that by implication it does. That may not be terribly helpful, but that's my ruling on the facts of the proposition. Chief Minister, what have you got a point of order or a question of the Attorney?
There's a question, sir. I'm not too sure actually if it's from you or if it's from the Attorney General. So if I can ask the question and then just see where it lands. And so if we've got two scenarios at the moment, which is one that the moves of the original propositions clarifies that actually legal advice can be redacted, or alternatively, that isn't the intention, and obviously there are consequences as a result of either of those pronouncements. But sir, the other question then is, what happens to when ministers have, for example, have opined or made a decision based on that legal advice? Would it be appropriate to redact that as well? Because obviously one has the context of the legal advice that ministers would be opining on. And therefore, if the legal advice has been redacted, what's the position for any comments by the ministers and arriving at their decision based on the legal advice? Does that make sense? I think it gets more complicated, I'm afraid.
I think possibly we're leaving the point and it's getting slightly too complicated. I don't think we need to resolve that question for the purpose of this debate.
Okay, sir, thank you.
If you think that you need to, then you can ask a question for the Attorney in due course about that. Deputy Labby, do you want to resume your speech? You haven't really started, have you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've never argued against anything to any move or voted against any move to increase openness and transparency since I've been in this chamber since 2014. But the Attorney General is unequivocal, and the writing is surely on the wall for this proposition, unamended. I mean, we can spend the next, we come back tomorrow and spend the morning finding ways to get round it. But there are two unfortunate words, which is without redaction. And there's no getting round that. And I speak as someone who's benefited hugely from one-on-one advice from the Attorney General, from the Solicitor General, not actually when I became a minister, but certainly where with some issues that really deeply troubled me when I was the chairman of the PPC and also the chairman of the Planning Committee, and also just as a non-executive member in the first term. And so I just think we have to listen to what we're being told here, not drive a coach and horses through this important convention, which when you've benefited from it, realise how valuable a resource it is to us. So there's no way I can vote for the proposition, but I will vote to amend it, and that'll go some way. I think the point that the Chief Minister was trying to make is you get a position where discussion follows legal advice, and so the legal advice percolates through a discussion. So clearly there has to be a redaction before the minutes can be released.
So, clarification, if I may.
Yes, Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to ask the Deputy Labby whether or not was he aware that in past events on planning committees, planning decisions, it has been suggested, I believe, by lawyers that there would be legal advice available in public to the committee. I just asked whether that's a matter that Deputy Labby is aware of. What he spoke about the planning committee there.
I won't go into the reason why I sought legal advice, but it was an issue that was deeply troubling for me, and I was incredibly grateful for the time and advice given to me by the Attorney General.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Wickenden.
Thank you, sir. I think I need to ask you really in one area, because this is the part where in the amendment I asked for an additional piece to be put in, but it's about the area of confidence. The unamended proposition talks about the minutes being released from the competent authority ministers in confidence to, without redaction, by the Chief Minister to that committee, being the Scrutiny Liaison Committee, as constituted, and then it's for distribution to the relevant scrutiny panels. Does the confidence and the confidentiality pass through from the Scrutiny Liaison Committee to the scrutiny panels in the wording as you would see it, please, sir?
Yes, yes, it does, because there's reference to in confidence twice. Is there not on the?
Only in the amendment. In the unamended version, sir, what would you see?
I thought you were asking about the amendment. Well, I would interpret that to mean that the sharing in confidence would be with the Scrutiny Liaison Committee and all scrutiny panels. Which
Thank you, sir. I just wanted
anticipate what was
clarification.
intended by the proposer. Yes. Are there any other members wish to speak on this?
Sir.
Yes. Senator Valois.
Yes, thank you. Just briefly, sir, I'd like to speak on the basis of, I think some of the questions around to the Attorney General and the arguments about whether things are unredacted or whether the Code of Conduct still sits or not. As a member of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, member of the PAC, member of the Privileges and Procedures Committee, we have a shared code of conduct between the government and scrutiny. There is nothing in the unamended version that suggests we're going to amend the code of conduct. The code of conduct, therefore, still stands. And I think it's important to understand that I speak from experience of having to sit on competent authorities ministers' meetings in terms of, and at this point, I think it's really important to thank and congratulate the expertise and the ability of the Secretariat of the GREP, because they've done extraordinary work during the last 18 months in terms of supporting minute taking, not just for competent authorities, for council and ministers and other various bodies that they serve. And they're extremely professional in the way that they carry out their work. And the reason why I say that, sir, is because I think sometimes there are spurious arguments made to what I feel like sometimes is trying to hide something that others shouldn't be seeing. And I think we need to be reminded of Deputy Morell's speech around that importance of transparency, but actually the sharing of information about overseeing the role of government. And we have to recognise this government isn't willing to have a form of committee of inquiry over the pandemic because the pandemic isn't over. Well, if that's the case, then at the very least, we should be asking to see the deliberations and the context in the way in which decisions have been made. And I think that's extremely important. And I think by asking it from a scrutiny perspective, rather than asking it to be published to the whole of the island, will enable the context to be provided for areas like, as an example, PAC are currently doing a COVID review on the back of a number of CNAG reports, but they may have to go further than that because they will have to report before the next elections because, of course, the elections are coming up very fast. But it's an important piece of work when there is a reluctance to have a form of committee of inquiry. So asking for minutes is important to identify the context in which elected officials have determined the information that they've been given by officials in order to make the decision that they're making. And I'll make it categorically clear to the whole of the State's Assembly that we will abide by the Code of Conduct because we are not amending the Code of Conduct. We can have an argument on specific words and what's stated in the report, but we are not amending the Code of Conduct. And I think that's really important to emphasise, sir, seeming as the questions that are being made to the Attorney General. And I think it's also important to reflect on the Chief Minister's speech on this amendment, because he saw frustrations during his time as President of the Chairman's Committee in the last term. I shared those frustrations. But I think there has to be a bigger and further discussion about what openness and transparency means, and what that means for the public in terms of deliberating what decisions are made upon their lives and how that is reflected in an appropriate and proportionate manner. And I don't think it's appropriate to say that elected officials should be hiding somewhere and having workshops behind the scenes, because it's not conducive to that wider thinking. There are a number of members in the Assembly that can actually, we've seen it in scrutiny in terms of Home Affairs as an example, where we've had briefings with the Minister, where we've looked at things because we've not been directly involved. So sometimes you can't see the wood from the trees, and somebody comes up with a question or identifying an issue that may be a learning issue going forward. So with the absence of having a form of committee of inquiry, but having to recognise that the States Assembly works as a whole, it's not the government versus scrutiny, it's not government versus backbenchers, it shouldn't be any of that. It should be us all working together on behalf of the public. And I think when we make the arguments about policy and development, I understand that, because we have FOI legislation, freedom of information legislation, that refers to a requirement to keep that under hood in terms of policy and development. But once that policy is in place, sir, there is a bigger question, and this has been a fight many times during my time in scrutiny, about the importance of releasing the information and understanding the context and why them decisions were made, and learning from why those decisions were made and whether we can do better going forward. And that's really the premise of why this is important, because it goes back to the point of Deputy Morale's argument about democracy. So I understand all the arguments that are being made about the legal ramifications and the arguments about certain wording and certain information in the reports, but I'd like to try and reassure members that the purpose of the proposition unamended was actually to try to be that critical friend and try to assist where there is no other way of doing so, and identifying a context in around the decision making that elected officials, not the advisors, the elected officials have made around impacts on people's lives. So, sir, from my point of view, I think the amendment actually dilutes the purpose of the original proposition. I think we already received papers and agendas, like we do in private briefings as states members, and I've got a bit of an issue about the amount of private briefings that we have in terms of openness and transparency to the public. And so I think, from my point of view, and I would ask sincerely to fellow members, after the time I've spent, not just as a member of scrutiny, but in my time as, whether as an assistant minister or as a minister in the States, that we can do this in the right way. We have to come together to do this in the right way. And the purpose of the proposition is to come to a joint understanding in the importance of overseeing decision making and sharing that learning and improving the outcomes for the public going forward. So I'd ask members not to support the amendment and to support scrutiny in their proposition for the minutes, because, like I said, we are not amending the Code of Conduct, so that will still be in place, and therefore we will be expecting to ensure that what we do in terms of a scrutiny function is oversee and hold to account the way that government works and learn from what we've done and improve for the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator.
Sir, may I propose the adjournment?
Adjournment proposed and seconded. Anyone wish to speak on the adjournment? No. Assembly is adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning.